Chapter 269. Bestowing swords and dividing treasures. Zhang Yan had been searching for medicine outside for more than 20 years, and he had met many outstanding cultivators. He had even lost many souls under his sword, and it could be said that he had fought and killed along the way. It seemed like he didn't care about this kind of battle that didn't involve life and death, so he said as if nothing had happened, "Yenny, when I watched you fight with Wan Zhang, although you were forced into a disadvantageous position, I saw that you didn't panic in the face of danger. You formed sword seals with your fingers and hid them in your sleeves, as if you still had the strength to fight. Let me ask you, have you learned the flying sword killing technique? Do you want to wait for the person to relax, then kill him with a surprise strike?" Lu Yenny was surprised. She thought that she had done this secretly, but she didn't expect that Zhang Yan would still see through it. She couldn't help but say with heartfelt admiration, "Master can see 1,000 miles, disciple indeed planned to do so." 4 years ago, after receiving martial uncle's advice, I went to Luo Island to listen to a sword talk and learned a few moves of the flying sword technique. It's just that this technique is profound, and forgive disciples' stupidity for not being able to learn its essence. When faced with an enemy, I didn't dare to go all out and could only scheme to win by trickery. She had heard that this master of hers had once split light 16 times in one breath, and it was extremely impressive. She was deeply impressed, so she secretly made up her mind to learn that flying sword technique as well. In Qinsang school, there would be a sword talk on Luo Island once every 16 years. Not only would sword techniques be taught, but those with the best comprehension would also be bestowed with a sword pellet. When she heard about this, she gladly went. Unfortunately, this trip wasn't smooth. She used all her strength to fight several rounds with a female disciple called Yuan Yanhui, but in the end, she was still slightly inferior and lost, and the sword pellet was won by the other party. After listening to Lu Yenny's explanation of the details, Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then finally shook his head and said, "This matter can't be blamed on you. The sword competition on Luo Island wasn't actually fair. If he was not wrong, that Yuan Yanhui was definitely like Feng Ming in the past, having already been secretly taught by a few elders and practicing swordsmanship for a few years. In this way, no matter how high one's aptitude was, how could one compare to her? Zhang Yan wouldn't have been Feng Ming's match if he hadn't had the help of the broken jade. He thought to himself, Yan Yi's foundation is solid, but even though it's stable, it's still much weaker when it comes to fighting with others." From what Yenny said, her comprehension in the art of flying swords is not low either. If she can really learn the art of the sword, then it'll really be a blessing. Thinking up to this point, he was filled with anticipation and said to Lu Yenny in a warm voice, "My disciple, show me the swordsmanship you've learned." Lu Yenny responded softly and immediately did as she was told. She cast a spell and a little white light flew out of the sachet. Under her control, it turned into a stream of light that flew back and forth, spiraling up and down like a graceful jade dragon dancing in the air. She demonstrated the sword moves that she learned from the righteous sword scripture, one by one. Zhang Yan watched carefully from the side, and he nodded to himself. He could tell that his disciple had put in a lot of effort in secret. Moreover, every single move of his was in accordance with the rules, and there was not the slightest flaw. The only flaw was in the sword ball. Flying swords were easy to learn but hard to master. Everyone could use the basic sword skills, but there were very few who could step into the upper realm. Even though there were many cultivators who could not enter the door due to their limited talent, there was another important reason, and that was that good sword sphere was extremely hard to find. Just like that time when Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao returned from the water country, they met Xin Yufeng who blocked the river to intercept them. Although this person used a sword sphere, because the quality was too poor, it was destroyed by the joint efforts of Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao using the heart-striking hammer. The sword sphere in Lu Yenny's hand was only refined by white essence. Although it could use many flying sword killing moves, it was too weak to fight against a strong opponent. She was also deeply aware of its drawbacks, which was why she did not use it when she fought with Wan Zhang that day. It was only when she was forced into a corner that she decided to pretend to be weak and prepared to take advantage of the moment when he was careless to suddenly use a killing move, hoping to turn the situation around. If she had a good sword sphere in her hand, why would she need to do this? Even if she used the sword escape, she would be able to contend with the opponent, and that white essence sword sphere could not do this at all. Zhang Yan shouted loudly, "If a worker wants to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. Disciple, what you lack is nothing more than a good sword sphere. Master once obtained one in the celestial market, now I will bestow it to you." He stretched out his hand and a clear light flew out and landed on Lu Yenni's body. Lu Yenni let out a low cry and opened her palm, catching the clear light in her palm. She saw a ball of lustrous brilliance rolling around there. It was agile and lively, and it was refreshing to the heart and spleen. It was very lovable. She hurriedly knelt down and bowed solemnly, saying, "Disciple thanks benefactor teacher for bestowing the sword." One must know that a sword sphere was not an ordinary talisman or instrument. It required a Yuanying cultivator to spend decades of hard work to refine it. Even a big sect like Qinsang school could not casually take it out. As for the sword sphere in Zhang Yan's hand, Yuanying Jinren used a total of 30 years to refine it. It could be seen how difficult it was to refine a sword sphere. After Lu Yenni stood up, she let out a slight sigh. Zhang Yan said in surprise, "Disciple doesn't like it?" Lu Yenni shook her head and said, "Disciple is happy that benefactor bestowed the sword sphere. It's just that disciple thought that even though I have the sword sphere in my hands now, junior martial brother Tian and junior martial uncle Luo still don't have a suitable talisman." Zhang Yan looked at her seriously and nodded in praise. "Yenni, I'm very happy that you didn't forget your friendship with your fellow sect members. You don't have to worry too much. I've already made arrangements for this. Go and call your junior martial brother and junior martial uncle Luo over. Oh, and also Shang Chang and junior martial niece Hanyue." When Qiu Hanyue heard this, she knew that Zhang Yan had already made arrangements. She accepted the order and left. Not long later, she brought these people into the hall. Zhang Yan swept his gaze over them, and he naturally understood their cultivations with a single glance. Luo Xiao had already passed the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. He was currently burning his meridians and refining his yang fire, but he didn't know which level he was at. As for Shang Shang, with the help of the clear nether heavenly lake, in addition to her diligent cultivation, she had also reached the 1st tier of the bright Qi realm after more than 20 years. For a cultivator with a demonic body, it was already a remarkable improvement. Qiu Hanyue wasn't his disciple, but her talent wasn't bad either. She was the same as Lu Yenni, also at the 1st level of the mystic light realm. Zhang Yan looked around and said, "This time, when I was searching for medicine outside, I also obtained many talismans. I have no use for them. What do you want? Go and choose." He shouted and waved his sleeve. Whoosh! Many magic treasures flew out at the same time. The binding phoenix vine, the jade pearl light flying needle, the escaping body flag door, the strike lightning seal, the black iron ruler, the protective lingji, the red copper sand, the alcohol shield of harmony, the fate-determining jade tablet, the gold magnetic copper mirror, the cloud overturning alms bowl, the dazzling Luo Daoist robe, and many other magical treasures were floating there. For a moment, the hall was filled with multicolored lights, the light of treasures shot into the sky, and the spiritual energy surged. Their eyes were filled with multicolored lights, dazzling and dazzling. It was rare for others to give one talisman to their disciple, but Zhang Yan let them choose. He was really generous. In reality, he still had many talismans on him. It was just that their origins were strange, and he was afraid that others would see through them, so he didn't take them out. Seeing that no one moved, Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. He pointed at Lu Yenni and said, "Yenni, you are my first disciple, so you can take one first." Lu Yenni's foundation was deep, so she had already regained her senses. Seeing that there were so many talismans in front of her, she knew that there was no need to be polite. She originally wanted a protective talisman, so after looking around, her gaze landed on the protective lingji. She walked forward and took it down with a raise of her hand. The blood essence on these talismans had long been wiped away by Zhang Yan. With a slight movement, she refined this talisman roughly, and with another hand seal, the lingji disappeared without a trace. Luo Xiao took a few glances and was quite interested in the binding phoenix vine. She raised her hand and pointed, saying delicately, "Master, I want this." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If fellow Taoist Luo likes anything, just take it." "Thank you, Master." Luo Xiao chuckled and went forward to take the binding phoenix vine with a wave of her hand. Shang Shang knew that her cultivation level was low, and she was only used for guarding the gate, so she didn't need any talismans. She thought to herself, "I'm just a servant in the sect. Master treats me well, but I can't be presumptuous." Her gaze drifted around, and suddenly, her beautiful eyes lit up. She saw that among the many talismans, there were dozens of coral pearls strung together. It was a talisman that looked like a bracelet. It looked very inconspicuous, and it was originally a gift from the Demon King of Clearfeather sect. It wasn't a rare item, so she went forward and chose it. Then, she retreated to the side obediently. Tian Kun was the youngest, but he was very decisive. At first, he went straight for the mellow shield of air containing harmony, and then he walked back with a satisfied expression. From the beginning to the end, he didn't even look at the other talismans. Zhang Yan nodded. This talisman was originally given to him by Guo Songyao, and now it could be considered as returning to its rightful owner. He turned his gaze again, and said to Qiu Hanyu with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Marshal Nisqiu is also here today, so you should choose a talisman as well." Qiu Hanyu's beautiful eyes lit up, and she said, "Really?" She was originally envious of the many talismans, but she didn't think that she would get one of them. She also had the pure nature of a young girl, and she immediately cheered and ran forward to touch this and that, looking at that. She seemed to think that all of them were good. After staring for a long time, she finally seemed to have made up her mind. With a wave of her hand, she took the set of Yin-ray flying needles of 4 stars into her hand, and then pressed it against her chest. She lifted her head and looked left and right, as if she was afraid that someone would snatch it from her. Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "Back then, I killed Taihao School's disciple Tseng Han in the open sea, and this set of flying needles was carried by him. There are a total of 28 of them, but this talisman needs to be matched with needle techniques. Just now, I can put it to use. Marshal Nisqiu, don't regret choosing this item." Qiu Hanyu wrinkled her nose, and pouted, and said, "Humph. Marshal uncle, you look down on people too much. My Qinsang school also has needle techniques. Moreover, when you go back and ask your master to refine these flying needles, you will definitely be able to change your appearance. You won't have to look so gloomy and horrifying." Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and didn't say much. He bestowed the treasure to this girl, but that was because he had an ulterior motive. He only wanted to rope in Fan Changqing, and as for what would happen to the flying needles in her hands, he didn't have the heart to care. Seeing that everyone had taken their talismans, he waved his big sleeve, and put away the remaining talismans. Then, he turned to Lu Yenny and said, "Yenny, there are still 3 years before the school's competition. In the next few days, you don't have to go out. I can give you some pointers, so don't slack off." The Qinsang School's competition was held once every 24 years. Back then, because Zhang Yan had to go out to look for medicine, he didn't make it in time. Now that more than 20 years had passed, there were still 3 more years before the next competition. In the past, when Lu Yenny walked in the school, she would look 3 times at every step, afraid that she would be tricked. But now that she suddenly had a master to look after her, she felt that everything was going smoothly, and the string in her heart was slightly relaxed. Hearing this, she suddenly felt a chill in her heart, and secretly warned herself that the path of cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall back. She must guard against arrogance and rashness, calm down, and cultivate properly. She couldn't slack off at all. She held her sword in hand, and said solemnly, Yinny wouldn't dare. After Chiu Hanyue received the flying needles, she was happily playing with them. When she heard the words school's competition, she seemed to have thought of something. She blinked, and raised her head, and said, I heard that martial uncle is going to fight with that Tu Xian the day after tomorrow? And you even chose to fight at Luanmingji? Zhang Yan smiled, and said, Martial niece Hanyue, you know quickly. Chiu Hanyue let out an, ah, and couldn't help but anxiously stomp her feet, and said, these disciples of aristocratic families are the most unkind. Luanmingji is the most dangerous place, and they might have some strange tricks up their sleeves. No, I need to tell master. After saying this, she hurriedly rode on the conveyance light, and turned into a light rainbow, flying out of the cave. Target equals _blank. Chapter 270. Uaming Island was located at the north of Longyuan Lake. Rocks pierced through the air on the island, slicing through the clouds and splitting the wind. The place where the water fell was a dangerous shoal filled with oddly shaped reefs. This place used to be a blessed land. However, thousands of years ago, there was a huge change that caused the spiritual vigor to be in a mess. Countless gravel hung in the sky, forming a spectacular spectacle. Every time there was a gust of wind and a huge wave, it would stir the gravel and let out a whistling sound that was like a tide. The waves were strange and the clouds were treacherous, and the momentum was terrifying. Because the battle between Zhang Yan and Tu Xian was not deliberately concealed, it did not take long for the news to spread throughout the sect. In a short period of time, it caused quite a stir. Not only did many of the junior disciples of the sect rush to the island early to wait, but some of the disciples who were slaying demons outside the mountain also rushed back to the sect overnight after receiving the flying sword message from their fellow sect members in order to watch the battle. There were also many disciples who had just entered the sect in the past 20 years who came together just to catch a glimpse of Zhang Yan's glory. Tu Xian thought that if he could win this battle, then all of Zhang Yan's previous achievements would be blown away, and it would be a fatal blow to his reputation. Even if he could not win, at least he wanted to let the other races see how hard he worked, so he invited his relatives and friends to watch the battle. Feng Zhen and Tu Xian were fellow disciples of the same sect, so they naturally arrived early. He was already a core formation cultivator now, so he rode on a 3-story flying swallow tower in the sky. Leaning on the railing of the tower, he looked into the distance and saw that the sky was filled with talismans. They were so densely packed that it could be said that they covered the clouds and the sun. He couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect that this bet between Zhang Yan and junior brother Tu would actually attract so many people. Beside him was a middle-aged Taoist with high cheekbones and a wide chin. He glanced sideways at them and said nonchalantly, this Zhang Yan had almost flattened the 6 rivers and 4 islands in the past. He was quite famous among the junior disciples of the master and disciple sect. Some disciples even flattered him on purpose. It is not surprising that there is such a scene. Feng Zhen sneered and said, impossibly stupid. He looked left and right a few times. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and he pursed his lips, saying, look, Xie Zongyuan is here too. The middle-aged Taoist turned around and saw a young cultivator with a crown on his head standing on a dragon-tooth Arkansas. There were 100 people following behind him. He raised his eyebrows and said, rumor has it that Xie Sailang and Zhang Yan are on good terms. It seems to be true. Feng Zhen suddenly said, senior brother Mo, what do you think are the chances of junior brother Tu winning this time? Senior martial brother Mo furrowed his brows and thought for a moment. It was impossible for Zhang Yan to not make any progress, but it was hard to say. Under normal circumstances, the two of them should have a 50-50 chance of winning, but on this Luanmingji, senior brother Tu had a slight advantage. Zhang Yan's sword escape technique is not easy to use. If he doesn't have any other methods, then junior brother Tu has a higher chance of winning. Feng Zhen nodded his head. He also agreed with this judgment. Although Tu Xian's little golden core wasn't a true golden core, it could still release a weak evil aura, and Mystic Light Realm cultivators wouldn't be able to block it. As long as he used it well, his chances of winning were very high. At this moment, a light drizzle started to fall from the sky. A cloud couch flew in the air and lowered a curtain. Inside was an enchanting and beautiful woman. She reclined on a soft cushion with a slightly lazy expression. She said to Huang Weining, who was standing at the side, "I heard that Junior Marshall's sister had personally seen that Zhang Yan showing off his power 20 years ago." Huang Weining allowed the cold drizzle to fall on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe it off. She pressed her hand on her magic sword and pondered, "This person is really impressive. However, the tree that stands out in the forest will be destroyed by the wind, and the pile that rises out of the shore will be destroyed by the current. This person's future is uncertain, so I don't think he will win." Wanming Island had never been so lively in the past 1,000 years. After Tu Xian chatted with the people he knew for a while, he came to the island and waited. Everyone else also moved to the side and left the island alone. Tu Xian glanced around, feeling extremely pleased with himself. In the past, he had always been so down and out, but today, he was the center of attention. Just now, there were many disciples from the great clans who took the initiative to greet him. No matter what these people thought in their hearts, their mouths were full of praises, and he accepted them calmly. He felt that choosing to fight with Zhang Yan was truly the right choice. As long as he defeated Zhang Yan, he would be able to complete his mission. Because everyone was afraid of missing this moment, they came here early. However, after the sun passed the middle of the sky, Zhang Yan still hadn't arrived. Thus, some people were dissatisfied and shouted, "Why isn't this Zhang Yan here yet? Could it be that he's afraid?" As soon as these words came out, there were immediately people who came up to agree. Some people who hated Zhang Yan even tried to belittle him to the extreme. Many disciples of the master and disciple faction were angry when they heard these words. Not to be outdone, they retorted sarcastically, and suddenly there was a lot of noise. This time, there were also many true disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands who came. They all looked on coldly from the side, not saying a word, watching from the sidelines. They knew very well that no matter what they said now, they couldn't hurt Zhang Yan in the slightest. It would not be too late to judge after the outcome of the battle was decided. The face of the island master of Jinyang River, Dai Xian, was expressionless. His eyelids were drooping, as if he was concentrating on adjusting his breathing. Ever since he was defeated by Zhang Yan, he had gone to the sword immortal Luo Yuanhua to learn swordsmanship. For the past 20 years, he had been longing to wash away his shame. Today, when he heard that Zhang Yan was going to fight with Tu Xian, he came on a cloud, wanting to see how far Zhang Yan's flying sword technique had advanced. Suddenly, a ray of light burst out of his eyes. He stood up, turned his head, and said, "He's here." Everyone's spirit was lifted. They all looked up and saw a sword light flying over from the west. It was as fast as lightning, and in the blink of an eye, it crossed the sky and came close. Dai Xian frowned and wondered, why is Zhang Yan's sword light not as good as before? Some disciples with good eyesight also felt strange. They didn't know that Zhang Yan was invincible in the sect. Later on, he fought against 100 people alone in the outer endless sea. The disciples of Qinsang school also felt proud of him. But this sword light was like water, and it didn't have the sharp and fierce momentum of the past at all. While everyone was surprised, the sword light suddenly dissipated, revealing a beautiful female cultivator. Her clothes fluttered like smoke, and a clear sword pill flew around her body. She stood there, with snow-white skin and a jade-like face. She was incomparably beautiful. Dai Xian was stunned, and said, "Who is this?" A disciple beside him who knew said, "This is Zhang Yan's eldest disciple, Lu Yenni." Dai Xian unconsciously shrugged and tugged at his beard, saying, "Where did she get the sword pill?" Even a disciple under Zhang Yan had a sword pill to control, and the sword light was extremely bright. It was obvious that she had a lot of potential. He thought to himself, is there going to be another Zhang Yan in the future? Lu Yenny came in front of Tu Xian and bowed. She said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Thanks for your long wait, my master will be here soon." Tu Xian glanced at her and waved his hand generously, saying, "I didn't say the time with senior brother Zhang, he can come whenever he wants. Anyway, I'll just wait for him here today." He really wasn't in a hurry, and even hoped that Zhang Yan wouldn't come. Wouldn't that make his reputation even more famous? But at this moment, suddenly, there was a faint singing voice coming from the horizon. Hidden sword edge for 20 years. Suddenly there's a long song that startles gods and ghosts, the great Tao is boundless, cutting off the wrong path, smiling at the vast ocean and listening to the sound of thunder. This song was majestic, and it sounded like the wind was sweeping away the clouds, with a feeling of great spirit surging. Everyone was excited when they heard it, and when they looked again, they saw a young Taoist in a black robe riding the wind with his hands behind his back. This person had a handsome face, but he was extremely tall, and his eyebrows reached his temples. His eyes were like the stars in the night sky, deep and unfathomable. When he came over, he was unafraid, and his sleeves fluttered, as if millions of people in front of him couldn't stop him. Although the disciples didn't see him raise his sword, they were all subconsciously taken away by his aura that was like a rainbow or a sword that shot straight into the clouds. No one made a sound. Xie Zongyuan, who was sitting on the dragon-tooth ship, saw him, and was the first to stand up. He cupped his hands at him and shouted, "Senior brother Zhang, we haven't seen each other for 20 years, how have you been?" Zhang Yan looked over, and when he saw it was Xie Zongyuan, he laughed and returned the greeting, "So it's senior brother Xie. Forgive me for having an arranged battle, and I can't say much. We'll catch up after this battle." Xie Zongyuan also laughed heartily and sat down. A few of Duda's disciples didn't expect this Xie family's fourth brother to take the initiative to greet him, and they all snorted coldly, expressing their dissatisfaction. But Xie Zongyuan didn't care about them. He was an affectionate and righteous person, and he still remembered the favor of saving his life that day. Although he couldn't stand on Zhang Yan's side because of his family, he could still boost Zhang Yan's reputation on the scene. The Yushuan Xie family was ranked second among the 12 great families, and only the Ruipingzheng family was higher than the Helen Du family, which was ranked third. These Du family's disciples couldn't do anything to him. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeve and continued to walk towards the center of the island. However, he had only taken a few steps when another young Taoist stood up and bowed solemnly to him. "Senior brother Zhang, I, Feng Ming, greet you." Zhang Yan couldn't help but stop and take a look. He said in surprise, "So it's senior brother Feng, long time no see." He also raised his hand to return the greeting. Someone in the crowd said in surprise, "Senior brother Feng is elder Sun's disciple." Looking at this situation, he also has a good relationship with senior brother Zhang. When they were in the Devil's Cave, Feng Ming thought that if it wasn't for Zhang Yan risking his life to bring up the rear, he wouldn't have been able to escape. He had always kept this in mind and was grateful to Zhang Yan from the bottom of his heart. He always wanted to find an opportunity to repay his kindness. Moreover, he was also a disciple of the master and disciple lineage, so he naturally stood out to support Zhang Yan without any scruples. After Zhang Yan bid farewell to him, he continued to walk forward. At this moment, a long laugh was heard. A Taoist with a round face and a big belly walked out. Beside him stood a young girl in colorful clothes. He said loudly, "Junior brother Zhang, I've received orders from senior brother to come and watch the battle. Don't worry and fight. If someone is playing tricks, I'll definitely uphold justice for you." Someone immediately recognized this person as Fan Changqing, who had a very high status among the third-generation disciples. Then the senior brother he mentioned was naturally the third-generation disciple, Qian Tian. They were shocked and couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at Zhang Yan. Some of the aristocratic family disciples who didn't know what was going on were also extremely shocked. They looked at Zhang Yan and re-evaluated his weight in the master and disciple lineage. However, Zhang Yan felt that Fan Changqing's words were strange. He and Tu Xian were fighting under the watchful eyes of everyone. Who would dare to do such a despicable thing? His gaze turned and fell on Qiu Hanyue, who was beside Fan Changqing. This girl smiled at him as if she was asking for praise. Seeing the corner of Fan Changqing's mouth twitch slightly, he immediately understood and felt it was funny. He cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll thank senior brother Fan. Please thank senior brother Qi on my behalf." Fan Changqing waved his hands and laughed, "You and I are brothers, there's no need to be so polite. Junior brother, you're treating me like an outsider." Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands to bid farewell. Fan Changqing let out a sigh of relief and looked at Qiu Hanyue. He smiled bitterly and said, "Disciple, are you satisfied? Your uncle Master Zhang is a smart person. If he didn't have the confidence, why would he agree to this battle so easily? You're worrying too much." Qiu Hanyue was the reincarnation of his daughter. She cultivated Dao and her aptitude was really good. He usually spoiled her and couldn't bear to discipline her strictly. However, he didn't want Qiu Hanyue to be so arrogant. Qiu Hanyue pulled on Fan Changqing's sleeve and giggled. She said, "Disciple will know. Master treats Hanyue the best." Fan Changqing looked at Lu Yenny standing behind Zhang Yan in a well-behaved manner. She didn't dare to overstep her boundaries. He couldn't help but feel envious. He coughed and wanted to act like a strict master. However, Qiu Hanyue pulled on his sleeve and shook it, making it impossible for him to put on airs. Zhang Yan walked forward again. At this moment, a colorful boat suddenly passed by. The bamboo curtain was lifted and a flirtatious girl came out. Her eyes were clear and her skin was like jade. She smiled at Zhang Yan and said, "Senior brother Zhang, do you still remember me?" Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He looked the girl up and down and nodded with a smile. "Junior sister Qin, your cultivation is getting more and more profound." Qin Nan looked at Zhang Yan carefully and her eyelashes twitched. She whispered, "I'm not as good as you, senior brother." There were people who didn't know Qin Nan and couldn't help but ask, "Who is that?" Someone revealed a look of disdain and said, "You don't know this senior sister. She's Immortal Peng's direct disciple, Qin Nan. She's senior sister Qin." Feng Zhen, who was watching from afar, sucked in a breath of cold air. On the way here, although the people who greeted Zhang Yan all had different backgrounds, none of the people behind them were simple characters. They all represented a great power. He originally thought that Zhang Yan didn't have much of a foundation in the sect and was only relying on Sun Jinren's appreciation and Zhou Chengju's care. He didn't expect this person to have so many connections in the sect. His foundation was far stronger than he imagined. When he thought of this, he didn't know why he suddenly felt a tightness in his chest. After Qin Nan and Zhang Yan exchanged a few words, she waved at Lu Yenny and said, "Yenny, come to Uncle Master's side." Lu Yenny glanced at Zhang Yan and the latter nodded at her. She came up and greeted, "Uncle Master Qin." Qin Nan pulled her over and said with a smile, "I've already said that you and I are sisters. There's no need for such formalities." She and Lu Yenny were close in age and usually got along well. Although they called each other uncle and niece in name, they were like good friends. The two girls stood side by side on the colorful boat, like orchids in spring and chrysanthemums in autumn. They each had their own celestial beauty and attracted the attention of many people. After Zhang Yan said goodbye to Qin Nan, he just now stood in front of Tu Xian and said, "Senior brother Tu, I've waited for a long time." Tu Xian's face darkened. It was only a few miles, but Zhang Yan rode on a cloud and walked for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. He was already in a bad mood and was rather impatient. He casually returned the greeting and said without any trace of politeness, "Zhang Yan, I know your flying sword is amazing. I'll take advantage of you and make the first move." Without waiting for Zhang Yan's reply, he let out a loud shout. His body trembled, and a fiery cloud of light shot out from the top of his head. To be continued. RQ. Target equals _blank. Chapter 271. Date 09-30th. For more interesting novels, please download Please Go Jiu Chinese. After Tu Xian finished speaking, he controlled the mysterious light and suddenly launched an attack. It was not that he could not wait, but he had already planned it and thought about it carefully. He knew very well that Zhang Yan was extremely skilled in the sword escape technique. Once he unleashed his sword moves, he would come and go unpredictably. Thus, he absolutely couldn't engage in a tangled battle with Zhang Yan. Thus, he chose this place to fight Zhang Yan. But even so, when Zhang Yan walked over, the aura that was like the sun in the sky still made him feel uneasy. At that moment, thousands of ideas went through his mind, and he immediately thought of taking down Zhang Yan in the shortest time possible. He could be said to be cunning and ruthless. In order to achieve his goal, he would not care about a little bit of face. Even if he thought that his cultivation was higher than Zhang Yan, he would take the initiative to attack first and not give the opponent any room to fight back. Thus, he used all his strength from the start. With a loud roar, the ball of fiery profound light above his head began to spin as if it was dancing. Then, it dispersed into thousands of blazing flames that soared into the sky before descending like a meteor shower. In an instant, it had enveloped almost everything within a radius of 1,000 feet. He saw that Zhang Yan was standing there motionlessly, and he could not see the expression on his face. It seemed that he was stunned by his attack, but he could not help but show a hint of joy on his face. He thought to himself, let's see how you dodge it. Why did he come to the scene first? That was because there were rocks on both sides of where he was standing, and he could not escape immediately. As long as Zhang Yan came in front of him, he would fall into his trap. At this moment, his aura soared, and the sky was filled with raging flames, boiling and violent. In an instant, he exerted the power of a core formation cultivator. This Luanmingji also seemed to have a red cloud of starfire, and the sky was illuminated with a fiery red color. The expressions of the surrounding people changed. No one had expected Tu Xian's profound light to be so domineering. They could only see the power that it had erupted with. It was actually not weaker than the attack of a core formation cultivator. Only to see that it was cruel and vast. As soon as the blazing flame descended, it enveloped Zhang Yan's entire body. Qiu Hanyue, who was watching the battle from the outside, cried out in alarm. Her beautiful face paled. She couldn't help but grip Fan Changqing's sleeve tightly. Xie Zongyuan frowned. The silver cup in his hand was already distorted. Feng Ming, who was standing on the other side, suddenly stood up and said to himself, not good. Lu Yenny knew that her master had been on the battlefield for a long time. He wouldn't be defeated so easily. Upon seeing the current situation, she could not help but worry in her heart. Qin Nan's bright eyes stared unblinkingly in front of her. She grabbed the latter's slightly trembling wrist and shook it. In a low voice, she consoled, younger sister, don't worry. Senior brother Zhang will definitely be fine. Feng Zhen and Taoist Mo looked at each other. They both saw the surprise in each other's words. They didn't think that Tu Xian had actually cultivated the sect's Furnace Dragon revealing creed. This Dao technique was passed down by Du De. When the technique was used, one needed to gather all the true energy in one place and then explode it in an instant. It was the only Dao technique in the sect that left no way out. It should be known that in a battle between cultivators, if not for the huge difference in cultivation level between the two sides, there would be too many factors influencing the outcome of the battle. No one would dare to risk everything in one throw. Although this kind of extreme method was powerful, it also had many drawbacks. However, very few people in the sect would put in the effort to cultivate it. Unexpectedly, Tu Xian had secretly cultivated it. If not for the fact that Tu Xian had only condensed a small gold core, he would not have cultivated this Dao technique. Furthermore, this technique was too dangerous and could not be easily used. Therefore, no one knew that he had cultivated it. Until today, just now, he had revealed it in front of everyone just to take down Zhang Yan in one fell swoop. Senior brother Mo looked at the place where the raging flames were and said meaningfully, "It seems that junior brother too has not slacked off all these years." The reason why most small gold core cultivators found it difficult to climb the Great Tao was not only because they condensed their core again, but also because they had suffered setbacks and their state of mind was unstable. After many cultivators failed once, they would lose their previous confidence and calmness on the path of Tao. However, Tu Xian had cultivated this Tao technique that cut off his path of retreat. It was enough to show that his heart had not given up and he still wanted to peek into the Great Tao. He was not as indifferent as he usually said. Feng Zhen's gaze was like a knife as he looked forward a few times. Suddenly, he laughed loudly and punched the wooden railing, saying, "This battle, Zhang Yan will lose without a doubt." Taoist Mo took a few glances and saw that the flames did not dissipate. He also stroked his beard and nodded, saying, "Yes, Zhang Yan will lose for sure." This time, Feng Zhen also brought a few disciples from the sect. Someone did not understand and asked, "Master, why did that Zhang Yan lose?" Feng Zhen smiled slightly and was not in a hurry to answer. Instead, he pointed at Taoist Mo and said, "Usually, you all want to ask Martial Uncle Mo for advice. Now that Martial Uncle Mo is standing in front of you, why don't you ask him?" Taoist Mo laughed and did not decline modestly. He pointed to the front and said loudly, "Let me tell you, this furnace dragon reveals creed was created by your grandmaster. Once it is used, it really covers the sky and the earth, like a rolling mat. As long as the opponent's skill is slightly inferior, he will definitely be heavily injured. If Zhang Yan can use his sword escape in time to avoid it, he only needs to endure the first few rounds. When junior brother Tu's strength is insufficient, he can at least maintain a situation where he will not lose. But look, there are many flying rocks around Zhang Yan, he cannot escape. It is equivalent to being in a hopeless situation, so how can he resist your senior brother Tu's attack? Therefore, he will definitely lose this battle." When the disciples heard this, they couldn't help but feel enlightened. They all sighed and said, "Listening to Martial Uncle's advice is better than several years of bitter cultivation." On the other side, Dai Xian, who was watching the battle closely at all times, was originally hoping to watch an exciting sword battle, but when he saw that Zhang Yan didn't seem to be able to fight back at all, a disappointed expression appeared on his face. He grunted and said, arrogant and conceited, "In the end, you've suffered such a fate. But I can't test the edge of the sword anymore. How sad." At this moment, most of the surrounding disciples were also not optimistic about Zhang Yan's chances. The disciples of the master and disciple lineage were watching nervously, but the aristocratic family's disciples were happy, waiting for the moment when he was defeated. The flame was like an eruption of underground fire. Although it was fierce, it came and went quickly. After a while, when the smoke and dust gradually dispersed, someone pointed to the front and shouted, "Look!" Zhang Yan's sleeves fluttered as he stood proudly in the void. There was a slight smile on his face, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll in a courtyard. In front of him, wisps of white smoke were flying out, like auspicious clouds, blocking in front of him. It changed into a myriad of shapes, allowing the blazing red flames to come wave after wave. The divination did not budge. Outside the island, the disciples of the Qinsang school all stared with wide eyes. Just a wisp of smoke was able to stop such a fierce attack. Everyone knew what this meant. The smoke rose and the clouds soared, the fog turned into illusions, and the clouds flew. It was impossible to form a pill. After a short silence. Then, there was a loud uproar, and exclamations rose like a tide. Someone from the master and disciple lineage was extremely excited, waving his hands and feet and shouting, "Pill fiend, that's Pill fiend. Senior brother has formed his pill." Feng Ming looked at it for a while, then looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. "Senior brother Zhang, you're really amazing. Junior brother, I'm a step behind you again." Feng Zhen crushed the wooden fence in his hand with a crack, and said with shock and anger, "Zhang Yan, he actually formed his pill. How can this be? How can this be?" Taoist Mo's face twitched, and he felt the strange gazes that were sneakily cast at him. He couldn't help but blush, and he was extremely embarrassed. He had made a decision too early just now, so much so that Fengzhen's disciples saw him as a joke. How could he still have the face to stay here? He grunted, and simply flicked his sleeves and left, ignoring Fengzhen's continuous shouts behind him. In an instant, he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared. The cultivators of the 6 rivers and 4 islands were originally excited, waiting for Zhang Yan to be defeated in battle. Then, they could hold their heads high and wash away their shame. However, the scene before them was undoubtedly a heavy blow to their hearts. All of their expressions were ugly, and they were speechless. Dai Xian's eyelids twitched, and his fingers trembled slightly. He had thought that after painstakingly cultivating for more than 20 years, he would be able to fight Zhang Yan no matter how bad he was. However, he had never imagined that Zhang Yan would actually climb the heavenly stairway one step ahead of him. Because he had been practicing the art of flying swords for so many years, his cultivation did not improve much. On the path of cultivation, one step behind meant that one would fall behind at every step. It could be imagined that in the future, the gap between him and Zhang Yan would grow larger and larger, and it would be extremely difficult for him to catch up. For a moment, he was extremely depressed, and after a long sigh, he also flicked his sleeves and left. When Tu Xian saw the wisp of smoke rising and curling up in the air, he was also flabbergasted and extremely shocked. No matter how much he calculated, he never imagined that Zhang Yan had already succeeded in refining medicine and formed his golden core. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen, and with a pft, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His fiery aura from before instantly plummeted, dispersing and disappearing like a meteor. At this moment, he knew that he could not disobey, and wanted to open his mouth to admit defeat. How could Zhang Yan give him this opportunity? Zhang Yan shouted out loudly like a thunderclap, and it forcefully suppressed the words that Yu Huo wanted to say. After that, Qin Shi flicked his sleeve, causing waves of smoke and dust to swirl up and strands of white mist to slap Yu Huo to the side, and then his shoulder shook once more. A completely muddy yellow hand instantly charged out from above, and its fingers spread wide open before pressing down like a mountain from the sky. Sky-Earth Dragon Capturing Palm. Tu Xian thought that Zhang Yan wanted to seize this opportunity to annihilate him on the spot, and at this moment, making a mistake was indeed feasible. When he thought up to here, he was instantly terrified to the point his soul almost left his body, and he shouted out madly as he forcefully squeezed out a strand of profound light to envelop his body before fleeing desperately. However, the momentum of the large hand was too fast, and every time he moved outwards, the large hand would expand accordingly. He had already moved several hundred feet away, but he still couldn't avoid it. Seeing that the large hand was pressing down on him, he became anxious, and his gaze swept left and right in search of a way out. However, this boundary was originally chosen by him to prevent the flying escape technique, so how could there be a way out in such a hurry? In this moment of anxiety, his gaze suddenly focused, and he saw that there were a few flying rocks not far away that were riddled with holes, and no longer looked as thick as before. Seeing this situation, his spirit was roused, and a feeling of ecstasy welled up in his heart. He secretly exclaimed, "The heavens are helping me." He freed his hand to take out a flying awl, and with a flick of his hand, he attacked that flying rock. It turned out that these few pieces of rocks had been corroded by his mysterious light earlier, and only a light blow would be needed to make a hole. In this way, as long as he broke out of the rocks, he would be able to escape this calamity. That Zhang Yan wouldn't dare to take the risk of killing his fellow sect members to chase after him, right? This action fell into Zhang Yan's eyes, and he naturally saw through Tu Xian's intention. The corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a sneer, and with a spell in his sleeve, an almost undetectable yellow ray flew out, and landed on that flying rock first. This was a ray of earth element true light that he had cultivated. It was as heavy as a mountain, and as solid as steel. It only needed to drill into that flying rock, and in an instant, it was as hard as metal. Tu Xian originally planned to first use the flying awl to make a hole in the rock wall, and then pass through it. After the flying all hit that flying rock, he didn't even look at the result, and impatiently rushed towards that place. The entire movement was like floating clouds and flowing water, and it was done in one breath. But when he rushed up, he saw that the flying rock actually didn't move at all, and was still standing firmly in one piece. He couldn't help but be shocked, but at this time, he had already moved forward, and how strong was his momentum. Even if he wanted to avoid it, there was only a peng sound, and instantly, his brain splattered, and his head smashed into the rock wall, dead. Zhang Yan lightly sighed, and folded his sleeves behind his back, and said, "But I didn't expect Senior Brother 2's character to be so unyielding. It's just a competition between fellow sect members, even if you lost one round, why did you have to commit suicide?" More interesting novels, please download Please Go Jiu Chinese. Target =_blank. Chapter 272. Gazing at the distant mountains desiring to ascend to the cold peak, Tu Xian crashed into the rocks and died. His corpse fell from the sky and fell from the clouds. This scene made the disciples of Qinsung school outside of Luanmingji look at each other. At that time, smoke and fire rose into the sky and mixed together. Looking up, it was a vast expanse. They could only vaguely see that Tu Xian was forced to retreat by Zhang Yan's mysterious yellow hand. Although the situation was critical, Tu Xian did not admit defeat. Everyone thought that he still had some tricks that he had not used, so they watched attentively. Who would have thought that he would suddenly do something like this? Zhang Yan's last sigh seemed to have become a footnote. All the disciples sighed. This senior brother too was defeated, and he actually wanted to die out of anger. He was indeed unusually unyielding. However, there were also people who secretly despised him. They thought that Tu Xian was really a sore loser. They didn't know how he cultivated to this stage. No wonder he only condensed a small golden core. With this kind of state of mind, how could he talk about immortality? It wasn't that no one among the onlookers had doubts in their hearts. However, Tu Xian's action was indeed done by himself. It could be seen that no one forced him, so they could only suppress this doubt in their hearts and shake their heads in silence. At this time, no one noticed that Zhang Yan secretly extended a finger from his sleeve. A trace of turbid air floated out from his fingertip and dissipated into the smoke and dust. When he fought with Tu Xian just now, what he used was not his own Dan Evil, but the golden core that Tao Xinren gave him. Now, he had squeezed out all the essence in it. At this point, it could be said to have died of old age. The reason why he did this was also because of deep consideration. He expected that there would be people who would come to check on him, so he couldn't let these people do as they wished. Although he wanted to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples, and if he did not display sufficient potential, it would be impossible for him to attract the attention of the upper echelons of the master and disciple line. However, he had his own plans in mind. Now was not the time to completely reveal his trump card. He still needed to patiently wait for an opportunity. Therefore, he only needed to reveal a bit of his ability today. Nothing could be accomplished in one go. Even though being eager for quick success could allow one to be in the limelight for a while, it also meant that danger would arrive one after another in a short period of time. However, if one needed to take things step by step and move forward slowly, then the additional variables that appeared on the way could be dealt with in a timely manner and wouldn't cause one to be flustered. Zhang Yan had always been bold and good at taking advantage of the situation. He dared to act decisively at the critical moment, but every time he acted, he would weigh the pros and cons. He would never act rashly. Actually, he was not wrong at all. After the battle ended, a few gazes that were mixed in the crowd left quietly. Among them was a young Taoist who wore a righteous scarf and robes. He had a faint smile on his face as he stepped on a cloud and arrived high up in the sky. He waited for a while, and then a tall and straight Daoren with a head of white hair and a face of a child arrived. The young Taoist hurriedly went forward to greet him. "I didn't expect to meet Martial Uncle Han here." "Martial nephew greets you." Daoren stroked his beard with a smile. So it's nephew Zheng Chang. Since we've met, then let's go together. Zheng Chang smiled. He was here precisely to wait for this person. He immediately said respectfully, long time no see, martial nephew also wants to seek martial uncle's help. He turned his body to the side and made a gesture of invitation. That Daoren took a look and nodded to go first. Zheng Chang followed slightly behind by half a shoulder and also followed. The two chatted as they walked, talking about some old stories. After chatting for a while, Zheng Chang changed the topic and said, I saw that Zhang Yan today. I didn't expect him to have already condensed his core. That Tu Xian's loss was not undeserved. Martial Uncle Han said indifferently, Zhang Yan has guts too. He actually dared to condense his core outside the sect. If I'm not wrong, he must have received help from an expert. Zheng Chang looked up at Daoren and probed in a low voice, then Martial Uncle, what do you think that Zhang Yan's core is at? Martial Uncle Han pondered for a moment and said, looking at that smoke, it should not be lower than 6th grade, but it should not be higher than 4th grade. Zheng Chang also nodded in agreement and said in a relaxed manner, Martial Uncle's discerning eyes are indeed not wrong. This nephew also thinks so. If that's the case, there is no need to worry about this person. Previously, I paid too much attention to this person. Martial Uncle Han's white eyebrows raised slightly and said in a low voice, I don't think so about Daoren. That Zhang Yan's reputation among the younger disciples is very high. After this battle, his name will definitely spread far and wide. If we don't stop him, he will also be a disaster in the future. Zheng Chang could not help but be a little puzzled and said in surprise, why does Martial Uncle Han say so? He only defeated a small golden core cultivator. Although his core is above 6th grade, there are many people in the sect who have higher success than him. Why is there a need for Martial Uncle to be so worried? Martial Uncle Han shook his head and sighed, if it was someone else, it would be fine. But have you forgotten that this person is a true disciple? Moreover, in less than 20 years, he has already formed his core. His speed is so fast that it is rare even for those with outstanding talent. Moreover, he has a cave in his hand, so it is not necessarily impossible for him to catch a glimpse of Yuanying. If we wait for him to become stronger, it will not be easy to suppress him. Zheng Chang carefully thought about it and felt that there was some truth in it. However, right now Zhang Yan was still a core formation cultivator, and the grade of his core could only be said to be passable. His reputation was nothing in his eyes, but he did not feel that it was much of a threat. This Martial Uncle Han was making a big fuss over a minor issue. However, out of respect, he still followed along and said, Martial Uncle's words are not wrong. Then why don't we find a reason to get rid of him? Martial Uncle Han waved his hand and said, no. His core is above the 6th grade, and he is a true disciple. No matter how bad he is, he can still become an elder. He is not so easy to get rid of. If we really make a move, it will instead force the master and disciple line to take the opportunity to make trouble. The gains do not make up for the losses. This is not something that a wise person would do. Zheng Chang was slightly puzzled, but when he turned to look, he saw that the other person looked like he had the pearl of wisdom in his hands. It was obvious that he already had a plan in mind, so he said, then according to Martial Uncle's opinion, Martial Uncle Han chuckled and said calmly, there are thousands of ways, but at this time, I coincidentally met an old friend. He offered me a wonderful plan. If it is done well, not only can the master and disciple line's overbearing attitude be somewhat restrained, but we can also take the opportunity to extinguish this person's arrogance. Zheng Chang's expression changed, and immediately put on an appearance of listening attentively. He bowed and said, please speak clearly, Martial Uncle. Now that he was able to run into this Martial Uncle Han here, it was because she had purposely allowed him to see her. Thus, he could conclude that Lady Han definitely had something to discuss with his Lady Zheng, which was why he decided to stay and wait. And at this moment, he had already heard that this Martial Uncle's so-called old friend was just an excuse. In fact, it was Martial Uncle Han who was leaking some information to his Zheng family, so of course he would find a way to find out. Martial Uncle Han stroked his beard and said unhurriedly, "In the past 10 years, there have been a few outstanding disciples from our various clans who have completed their core, but they have not yet reported it to the sect. In order to encourage the younger generation, we can have a pill grading and weighing conclave, and since Zhang Yan is a true disciple of the master and disciple line, he must come." Zheng Chang was startled at first, then his expression became excited, and he pounded his palms, praising incessantly, "Good plan, good plan." There was originally a rule in Qinsang school that every few decades, when a true disciple completed their core, they had to hold a conclave to weigh the disciple's fa li and the grade of the completed core. In reality, this was also a competition between the master and disciple line and the true disciple of the Xianmen aristocratic families. However, since there had been changes in the Qinsang school, because there had not been a true disciple in the master and disciple line for 100 years, there was naturally no need to hold such a conclave. But after the Battle of the Three Pools, the master and disciple line pressed forward step by step, and there was a tendency to once again surpass the aristocratic families, so the various clans were also planning countermeasures. And Zhang Yan gave them an opportunity. He was a true disciple of the master and disciple line, so the various clans could take this opportunity to propose a pill grading conclave to frighten the disciples in the sect, and let them clearly recognize that the Xianmen aristocratic families still could not be ignored, and that they were still the pillars that supported the Qinsang school. Although this move did not see the shadow of knives and swords, or a reign of terror, it could greatly deter the master and disciple line. Zheng Chang's thoughts turned like lightning, and he already understood that this was not a decision that the Han family could make in a moment. It must be a secret plot between the 5 families, and they had already reached a tacit understanding with each other. They were only waiting for Zhang Yan to complete his core, and then they would throw out this matter. In a sense, Zhang Yan refining the core at this time was instead what they hoped to see. But the 5 families had a transcendent status among the aristocratic families, and they could not directly walk to the front of the stage, then there would be no room for buffer, so this matter needed another family to take the lead, and the Zheng family was the head of the 12 great families. Whether it was prestige or power, it was enough to push this matter. Zheng Chang thought for a long time, and said, "If we can really hold a pill grading conclave again, when the time comes, we can choose a few outstanding talents, and we can also show that our aristocratic families are full of talents, enough to suppress the master and disciple line. This nephew will go back and report this matter to the elders in the clan." Senior Uncle Han chuckled, and with a wave of his sleeve, he said, "That is how it should be. If there is good news, don't forget to tell this old man. I will go now." Zheng Chang hurriedly bowed again, and when he raised his head, this senior Uncle Han had already disappeared without a trace. At this time, Zhang Yan also stepped out of Luanmingji. He had won this battle, but his expression was calm, and there was not a trace of arrogance or complacency. With a light wave of his sleeve, he walked out unhurriedly on the wind. Those who were familiar with him, such as Xie Zongyuan, Feng Ming, and the others, surrounded him to congratulate him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Yan also invited everyone to sit at the clear nether heavenly lake on another day, and talk about the feelings of parting. After this group of people bid farewell to him, he came before Fan Changqing, and cupped his hands, saying, "Senior brother Fan, I have kept you waiting." Fan Changqing also cupped his hands to return the greeting, and laughed, "Junior brother has succeeded in condensing the core, I congratulate you." What he said earlier about coming here under Qi Yuntian's instructions was not all nonsense. When he heard that Zhang Yan had killed Wan Zhang and Wenan as soon as he returned, Qi Yuntian thought far ahead, and thus ordered Fan Changqing to come here to check on Zhang Yan's current cultivation. As early as when Zhang Yan came into their sight, because of his identity as a true disciple, Qi Yuntian felt that he might be able to help him in the future. Now that the relationship between master and disciple was about to rise again, their next step was to help Ning Chongxian win the position of the top 10 disciples. And just Ning Chongxian alone was not enough to completely suppress the aristocratic families of Xianmen. It should be known that although Qi Yuntian was a Yuanian cultivator, and the 3rd-generation senior brother, it was very likely that he would be the next sect leader, but this position was not without people coveting it. Not to mention the several outstanding disciples in the aristocratic families, even Zhuang Bufan and the others had the intention to replace him, so he also needed a capable person in the sect to share the pressure for him. Zhang Yan had shown enough potential in the early days, so he was also regarded by Qi Yuntian as one of the candidates for the top 10 disciples after Ning Chongxian. However, Zhang Yan was not the only one in Qi Yuntian's hands, there were a few others who were also the best of the master and disciple lineage. Who could stand out in the end, it would depend on their own means. This was also what Qi Yuntian was happy to see. In this way, he could make these disciples compete with each other, and he could stand out and firmly control these people in the palm of his hand, paving the way for him to take over the position of sect leader in the future. Now that Fan Chongqing had identified it, he already had an idea in his heart. Although the quality of Zhang Yancheng Dan did not exceed his expectations, it was not that bad either. He would naturally go back and discuss with Qi Yuntian how to support him next. However, he did not know that Zhang Yan had never been a person who was unwilling to be inferior to others, and would not play according to the chess game that they had set up. He had his own position in his heart, and long before returning to the sect, he had already planned a countermeasure, so when talking to Fan Chongqing, he was neither too distant nor too close to him. Unexpectedly, his attitude caused Fan Chongqing to think even more highly of him. After chatting with him for a while, Fan Chongqing left with a smile on his face. Before leaving, he said meaningfully, "Junior brother Zhang, work hard on your cultivation, there will be a place for you in the sect in the future. Target equals _blank. Chapter 273. After sending off Fan Chongqing and the others, Zhang Yan just now went over to talk to Qin Nan and said with a smile, "Junior sister Qin Nan, do you have time to come to my residence?" Qin Nan was joking with Lu Yenny, and when she saw Zhang Yan talking to her, she casually turned around and smiled, "All right, since it's senior brother's invitation, then I'll have to trouble you." Zhang Yan smiled lightly and said, "Since it's like this, then I'll bring junior sister along. Sorry for the offense." As soon as he finished speaking, he shouted and waved his sleeve. Instantly, a cloud appeared and supported the two women's feet. After that, he formed a seal and executed the minor universe movement technique. In the blink of an eye, the three of them left the Qinsang school and headed straight for Clear Nether Heavenly Lake. The two women only felt the wind blowing past their ears, and the scenery before them was a blur. They knew that this was because they had flown to the extreme. Qin Nan praised in her heart, "Senior brother Zhang has left for 20 years, and not only has he succeeded in condensing his core, he has also learned many superior techniques. He's really extraordinary. No wonder even Master praised him so many times." Her thoughts were pure envy and not the slightest bit of jealousy. The reason why Tao Xinren valued her and took her from his disciple to be his direct disciple was because she had a pure heart and true feelings. Usually, she dared to joke and laugh, but once she started cultivating, she would naturally forget everything, and the distracting thoughts in her heart would be washed away like flowing water, leaving not a trace. At this moment, the two women felt their figures stop, and when they looked again, they were surprised to find that in just a short while, they had actually arrived at the decorated archway of Clear Nether Heavenly Lake. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and circulated a seal to open the formation door, then he lifted his foot and walked in. The two women looked at each other and strode in as well. In a flash, they landed in the main hall of the abode. Zhang Yan was about to turn around and call out to Qin Nan, but Qin Nan covered her mouth and laughed, saying, "Senior brother, please leave quickly. It is enough for junior sister to have Yenny here. With senior brother here, Yenny doesn't even dare to speak loudly." Zhang Yan was usually gentle and kind to others, never harsh, but when Lu Yenny looked at her master, she always felt that he was dignified and deep. Unfathomable. He naturally restrained himself and did not dare to overstep the boundaries. Zhang Yan laughed out loud, and said in a carefree manner, "It's my fault. All right, Yan Yi. You can be considered half the owner of the Clear Nether Heavenly Lake. Since you and junior martial sister Qin hit it off, you should take martial uncle on a tour. I won't be an eyesore here." Lu Yenny hurriedly bowed her head in agreement. After parting with the two women, Zhang Yan also walked out of the main side hall. He thought to himself, I haven't seen Zhou Shixiang for 20 years. Since I'm returning to the sect today, I should go somewhere else. I also have many things to discuss with him. He was about to move when he suddenly thought of something. He turned around and entered the side hall. He sat cross-legged on the couch and called out to Luo Xiao in his mind. Not long later, Luo Xiao came gracefully and bowed. She smiled gently and said, Master, why did you call me here so urgently? Zhang Yan said solemnly, Taoist Luo, there is an important matter that you must do. Luo Xiao heard that it was an important matter and her smile faded a little. She said seriously, Master, please instruct me. Zhang Yan said, I'm sure fellow Taoist Luo has met my disciple, Tian Kuan. He has a mother who lives under Baofeng View River in Zhurong Mountain in the country of Liang. Now that he has become my disciple, in order for him to cultivate in peace, I need to bring his mother here to settle down and fulfill his filial piety. I don't trust others with this matter, so I need fellow Taoist Luo to go with me. Luo Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and looked at Zhang Yan with rebuke, so that's the case. I was still wondering what happened, but Master gave me a fright. Don't worry, Master. I'll personally make a trip and I'll definitely bring Kuan-er's mother back unharmed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, for a safe journey, Taoist Luo, I will lend you this treasure. He stretched out his hand and pointed. A clear light flew out and landed in Luo Xiao's hand. She picked it up and saw that it was a treasure cicada carved out of beautiful jade. It was delicate and lively. The jade was white and cute. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and said in surprise, why do I feel that this thing's aura is familiar? Zhang Yan smiled lightly and said, could it be that fellow Taoist has forgotten? When I went to the heavenly bright lake with you that day, we encountered the demonic carp Chu Chang obstructing our path. After he died, he dropped this treasure. Later on, I refined this treasure to recover its original appearance. This treasure is called the longevity-locking cicada, and it's a profound artifact. During battle, no matter how many treasures or flying swords the opponent uses, so long as they're touched by this thing, they'll be unable to escape, and you can take whatever you want. When Luo Xiao heard that this treasure had such a wonderful effect, her beautiful eyes lit up. She didn't stand on ceremony. With a flip of her wrist, she put the treasure into the fragrance bag. She patted it lightly and said, then I will go. Master, please wait for the good news. After she finished speaking, she chuckled and turned her body. She leaped up and transformed into a black light that was like ink. She left the side hall and headed towards the abode. After arranging this matter, Zhang Yan walked out from the side hall. Before he reached the main hall, he heard Qin Nan's voice. Yenny, you got a name for this sword sphere? Lu Yenny said, there is a rule in the world. When the moon is full, it will be full. When it is full, it will be full. When it is full, it will be short. Everyone has the same principle. Yenny thinks that I can't be proud and complacent, so I named this sword sphere Missing Moon. Missing Moon, a good name. Qin Nan stood up from her seat with great interest. She said with a straight face, younger sister just got this sword sphere. Let older sister have a taste of younger sister's sword. Lu Yenny also felt that it was quite interesting. She pursed her lips and smiled. Okay, older sister, don't beg for mercy later. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. He didn't want to disturb their fun, so he stopped and watched from the side. With a shout, Lu Yen raised his hand and threw the moon-missing sword pill into the air. Suddenly, a ball of cold light was emitted in the main hall. Like a ripple, it shone on the pearls on the stone wall. Then, with a point of his hand, a ray of light flew toward Qin Nan. Back then, Zhang Yan used a total of 16 days to refine the star. That was because he obtained it when he was at the Clear Qi realm. Now that Lu Yenny was at the Mystic Light realm, it only took her a day and a night to refine the sword sphere. She could use it freely. It was also because she practiced hard in secret. Other than not being able to split light into shadows, she could use all kinds of tricks. Qin Nan saw that the sword sphere was coming at her quickly. She shouted and a bright beam of light flew out from the top of the door. This beam of light was like the moonlight. It was as clear as water. With a slight shake, it blocked the sword sphere and prevented it from falling. Qin Nan cultivated an orthodox Tao art as well, and it was similar to the Trinity of Purity scripture that Lu Yenny cultivated. Both of them focused on one's foundation, yet didn't attach importance to battle. As a bystander, Zhang Yan could see clearly that Immortal Peng had high expectations for Qin Nan. Therefore, the method he taught didn't pursue the power of the enemy. Instead, he focused on building a solid foundation. However, it was difficult for such a disciple to win when fighting with his peers. Therefore, he could only rely on the protection of his master. When he reached a certain level of cultivation, it was just now that he would be sent out to gain experience. Zhang Yan saw this and was lost in thought. On his face, he was deep in thought. He couldn't help but think about what kind of cultivation method he should choose to cultivate after his dan is formed. After pondering for a while, he had some ideas in his mind. However, this matter still needed to be discussed with Zhou Chengju before he could make a decision. Although Lu Yenny and Qin Nan were just sparring, both of them held back. After fighting for a while, they laughed and joked together, hand in hand, and went down to the lower palace. Seeing the two leave, Zhang Yan smiled and waved his hand. The formation door above the main hall turned and he stepped out. When he was outside the Heaven Lake, he shook his sleeves. He turned into a snow-like mist and flew in the direction of the Danding courtyard. This time, he intended to seize the position of the top 10 disciples. He had various plans in his mind, but he couldn't avoid Zhou Chengju. Perhaps because Zhou Chengju rarely appeared outside, Zhang Yan felt that everyone in the sect had actually underestimated this alchemy grandmaster. First of all, even though Zhou Chengju was not a Taoist abode Jinren, he was a Jinren of the third stage of Yuanying. At this stage, except for the 10 Taoist abode Jinren, there were very few people who could surpass him in cultivation. After all, he was a direct descendant of the Zhou family, so his magical power should not be weak. There was also a detail that Zhang Yan had almost overlooked before. That was, his cheap senior brother could almost see the sect leader at any time and place. This was not simple. Even the 4 Zenrens, Meng, Zhu, Yan, and Sun, as the sect leader's direct disciples, did not have such treatment. It could be seen that Zhou Chengju's position in the sect leader's heart was definitely not low. Now, his escape method was very fast. His body was like the wind and the cloud, which was not the same as in the past. Not long after, he arrived above the Danding courtyard. Because he had the talisman with him, he did not encounter any restrictions along the way. He passed through several temples and came to the inner lake of the courtyard. Looking around, he saw that the familiar fish boat was still floating on the lake. He descended and landed on the boat, then lifted the curtain and entered. "Is it junior brother? I have been waiting for you for a few days." Zhou Chengju was wearing the sun, moon, and stars robe, holding a square crane beak ruler in his hand. His black beard reached his chest, and he was standing in the building looking at him with a smile. Zhang Yan stepped forward and bowed, saying with a smile, "It's junior brother's fault. I should have come to senior brother's place as soon as I returned to the sect." Zhou Chengju chuckled, came up and patted him on the shoulder, saying, "You and I are not like others, why do we need to care about this?" He took a few more steps back and carefully looked at Zhang Yan. He could not help but sigh and said, "Junior brother, have you really achieved Jin Dan? But why do you want to condense your Jin Dan outside the sect? Wouldn't it be better to refine medicine after returning to the sect?" Zhang Yan did not answer directly, but said with a smile, "Senior brother, you may not know, but this time on the East Sea, I helped Tao Jinren, Tao Jinhong to obtain the Immortal's abode, and he was able to achieve the position of Grotto Heaven." Zhou Chengju was worried that Zhang Yan would destroy his Tao foundation because of a moment of impulse, but after hearing this, he could not help but feel relieved. In his opinion, Zhang Yan helped Tao Zhenren achieve Tao, and this was a great favor. Even if Zhang Yan did not say anything, Tao Zhenren would still take the initiative to help. With the protection of Taoist Dong Tian, even if the grade of the Jin Dan was not high, it would not be too bad. Only now did he dare to ask, "Junior brother, I wonder what grade of Jin Dan you have achieved this time." Zhang Yan laughed heartily as he released his aura, and then a strand of white smoke flew out. This vital energy was extremely pure and indistinct. It was like a lofty mountain or a flowing river, and it carried a strand of powerful and righteous energy. As soon as it was released, it shook the fish boat to the point it swayed left and right as if it was on the verge of capsizing. Zhou Chengju was stunned at first, then his lips and beard trembled, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. With a crack, he unconsciously crushed the jade tablet in his hand. Chapter 274. Devising a plan. Raising one's hand to help, Zhang Yan and Zhou Chengju had a secret talk for the whole night. When the sun was about to rise, just now they stepped out of the fish restaurant. Zhang Yan stood still on the deck in front of the restaurant, turned around and said, "Senior apprentice brother, there is no need to send me off." Zhou Chengju shook his head and said, "It's only a few steps." He then said in a low voice, "Although junior apprentice brother's consideration is thorough, it is still better to be careful. If the situation is unclear, it is better to leave as soon as possible. With the quality of your Dan now, there are many people who want to win you over. There is no need to hang yourself on one tree." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement and said, "Senior apprentice brother's words are wise, I will remember it." He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Then, I will leave everything to senior apprentice brother." Zhou Chengju solemnly returned the bow and said with a solemn expression, "Junior apprentice brother, rest assured, I will personally go and talk to the head immortal." Zhang Yan laughed heartily, "With senior martial brother personally taking action, I, your junior martial brother, can rest easy." Zhou Chengju couldn't help but laugh, pointing at Zhang Yan and sighing, "Junior apprentice brother, don't flatter me. But this plan of yours is also beneficial to the head immortal. I have more than 70% confidence that I can persuade him." Zhang Yan knew that Zhou Chengju never spoke empty words and only dared to say such words because he was extremely confident. He nodded and cupped his hands to bid farewell to Zhou Chengju. After that, he leaped up from the ground and turned into a cloud of smoke that curled up into the sky and flew out of the clouds, disappearing in a flash. Zhou Chong raised his eyes to look at the horizon, and he sighed with emotion in his heart. This junior brother of mine is quick-witted and extremely shrewd, and he always does something that surprises others. The last time he made such a plan was before the four-symbol god slaughter formation was destroyed, and the facts proved that the benefits obtained later on far exceeded his expectations. Zhang Yan's intention to compete for the position of the top 10 disciples in the sect was not unexpected to him. Instead, he was excited. After learning the quality of Zhang Yan's Dan, even if Zhang Yan was not as good as him, he would still urge him to do so. It must be known that ever since the founding of the Qinsang school, there had never been a disciple who did not ascend to the position of a heavenly abode from the 10 great disciples. Now, the 10 heavenly abodes all had such a background. Naturally, to be able to cultivate to such a level, it was unknown just how many of their peers they had killed. Take the sect master, Qin Mabai, for example. He originally had a total of 9 disciples under him, and every single one of them was a figure that overflowed with natural talent. All those years ago, every single one of them possessed the strength to ascend to the heavenly abode, yet up until now, only 4 of them were still in the sect, and the others had either died or gone missing. Another example was Meng Zhen. He originally had 22 disciples, but including Qi Yuntian, until now, only 3 were by his side. It could be seen how fierce the competition was. In Zhou Chengju's opinion, the Zhou clan was deeply rooted in the Yuxiao school, and it was extremely difficult to destroy it. If Zhang Yan did not become a heavenly abode master, he would probably have no hope for the rest of his life. Therefore, no matter what price he had to pay, he had to support him to sit in the position of the top 10 disciples. However, Zhang Yan's plan could be advanced or retreated, and it was not to the point where it would lead to a dead end. Otherwise, Zhou Chengju would also have to consider whether or not to stake everything on this one throw. He stood where he was and stroked his long beard. Seeing the red sun spurting out from the horizon, a faint smile appeared on his face, and with a wave of his sleeve, his body turned into a golden light and disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan rode a cloud all the way back to the clear nether heavenly lake. He was very clear in his heart that he was sitting on a piece of heavenly abode, and he was also a true disciple. Now, the quality of the pills he had completed was also amazing. It could be imagined that once this matter was exposed, it would usher in a storm. Not to mention the master and disciple, among the top 10 disciples who were born in aristocratic families, all of them would definitely view him as a great enemy. Therefore, before this matter was exposed, he had to first set up a stable foundation, reverse the disadvantageous situation, and occupy a position of initiative, rather than be someone's hired thug or pawn. To achieve this, he first had to find someone strong enough to shelter him from the wind and rain, and support him from behind. In fact, he had already decided on this person long ago. He only needed to wait for Zhou Chengju's news to come back, and then he could make his move. As he was flying, he saw a message smoke fly over, emitting a sharp whistling sound. He couldn't help but frown slightly. This message smoke was like a whistling golden sword, and it was a technique used by the disciples of Qinsang school to call for help. He couldn't help but feel strange. Now that the 3 lakes had been eliminated, outside of the Qinsang school, who would dare to touch the disciples of the school? However, since it was a request for help from a fellow disciple, as a true disciple of the school, he couldn't just leave them to die. He waved his sleeve and turned back to where the message smoke came from. At this time, over 100 miles away from him, there were 5 disciples dressed in the bright robes of Qinsang school sitting in a circle. There were men and women among them, and all of them had pale faces. They were forming hand seals and desperately spitting out the spiritual energy in their stomachs to maintain the formation in front of them. In this formation, a huge and ferocious demon crocodile was being suppressed. Its fierce eyes flashed, and it kept raising its head and flicking its tail, as if it was trying to break free from the formation. Every time it moved violently, these disciples couldn't help but tremble. Among them, a young girl in a purple dress with a face like a full moon was filled with anxiety. Seeing that everyone was faintly showing signs of not being able to hold on any longer, she immediately encouraged them, "Junior brothers and junior sisters, please hold on for a little longer. I've already sent out a communication smoke. It won't be long before senior brothers from the sect come to help us." Everyone's spirits rose slightly, and they desperately urged the profound chi in their bodies to suppress this demon crocodile again. A young man panted and said, "Senior sister Mo, I can't hold on anymore." The young girl in a purple dress gritted her teeth, took out a pill, and threw it over. She said, "Junior brother, take this grand elemental pill." She then raised her voice and said, "This monster's cultivation is above ours. If it breaks free, the first thing it will do is kill us. Everyone, don't relax." This demon crocodile was also very impatient. This place was so close to the gate of Qinsang school, and the other side had sent out a message for help. As long as a random profound light realm cultivator came out, he wouldn't be able to stop them. Its eyes turned, and it immediately said, "You juniors are so unreasonable. This place is the territory of Qinsang school. As long as you let me go, I won't even have time to run for my life, so why would I bother with you? You are just here to guard this place. It's not like you were the ones who captured me. Even if you take me back, the merit won't go to you. Why do you need to use your profound chi to fight me?" Hearing this, the hearts of the disciples started to waver. The senior sister who had captured the crocodile had returned to the sect because she was heavily injured. However, she had ordered them to stand guard here. Perhaps it was because of this that the spell formation became unstable and showed signs of cracking. That was why they had acted to stop the crocodile. But then again, even if they stopped this demon crocodile from escaping, they wouldn't have any merit to speak of. At most, They would just get a few more spirit shells, but it wasn't worth it compared to using their true yuan. Thinking like that, their willpower instantly weakened. Although they didn't stop, the array seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Seeing this, the young girl in a purple dress became anxious and said, "Don't listen to this demon's nonsense." Before she could finish, there was a sudden loud bang, and the demon crocodile rushed out of the formation. It rolled on the ground and turned into a tall and sturdy man. He stood up and said with a hideous smile, "You juniors, stay here and die for me, your master." Once the array was broken, the disciples staggered back. One of them was both shocked and angry. "Don't be so arrogant. Why are you still here instead of running for your life? Be careful, my senior brother will come." The burly man laughed loudly and said, "Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? Do you really think I'll let you go? It's because this place isn't far from the gate of Chinsang School, and I'm injured. Even if I run, I won't be able to escape far. So I can only take you down today to have a path of survival. If anyone doesn't let me go, you'll all be buried with me." The disciples were shocked when they heard this. Only now did they understand the demon's plan. They didn't expect him to be so cunning. However, it was too late for regrets. The burly man opened his mouth, pulled out a tooth, and spat out a mouthful of blood essence. He chanted a few incantations, and with a shake of the wind, a mountain-splitting broadsword appeared in his hand. He didn't care about anything else at all, and with a strange, wah sound, he leaped up and chopped down at a person. However, just as he was in the air, a cloud of smoke that was as white as snow descended from the sky. The disciples only heard a rumbling sound before they suppressed it. When the smoke and dust dispersed, they were already lying on the ground, unconscious. Zhang Yan scoffed coldly in the air. He then pushed aside the clouds and created a gust of wind as he returned to the clear nether heavenly lake. This demon was only at the first level of the mystic light realm, and he could subdue it with a wave of his hand. It was a small matter to him, so he didn't bother talking to these disciples. Killing a mystic light realm spirit demon with just a wave of his hand, and seeing the wisp of smoke, the disciples immediately knew that a core formation realm senior of the sect had happened to pass by and saved them. They all felt extremely lucky. The girl in purple quickly took 2 steps forward and bowed. She said loudly, "May I know which senior of the sect saved us?" "Junior Moing thanks you." However, although she asked, she didn't get a reply for a long time. She couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, but she knew that most seniors in the sect were like this, so she wasn't surprised. The youth with delicate features suddenly spoke, "Senior Sister Mo, this junior saw that senior's appearance." It looks like, Mo Ying's eyes lit up, and she said, "You saw this senior's appearance?" This young man actually only caught a glimpse of him, but he said with great certainty, "This senior seems to be Zhang Yan, martial uncle Zhang from that day on Wanmingji." As soon as he said that, the few of them became excited. "It's martial uncle Zhang. It's definitely him. That cloud of mist is heading towards the clear nether heavenly lake. Ha, so it was martial uncle Zhang who saved us. When this junior goes back, my senior and junior brothers and I will definitely be envious." However, none of them noticed that Moing was staring at the sky in silence. There was a complicated expression on her face. Zhang Yan used the minor universe movement art and flew forward. A faint cloud of mist floated past in the sky, and he returned to the clear nether heavenly lake in a short while. He had just landed in the hall when he heard a voice by his ear, "Is Master back?" "Slow down, this servant has something to report." He looked back and saw Shang walking over leisurely. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Shang, what is it?" Now that Luo Xiao had left the mountain gate, all the matters in the residence were arranged by Shang. She was also cautious and kept everything as it was, not daring to overstep the boundaries. Now that she came up, she raised her hand and lowered her head. She handed a letter to Zhang Yan and said, "Master, there was a letter just now." "Oh." Zhang Yan raised his hand and took the letter. He knew it was a letter from Xie Zongyuan just by looking at the cloud patterns on it. He opened the letter and took out the letter. After a few glances, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This letter said that Madame Zheng was contacting various families in the past few days with the intention of holding a pill grading assembly for true disciples. This action would also drag Zhang Yan into it, so Xie Zongyuan suggested that he leave the sect to hide for a few days and stay away from this storm, so as to avoid being caught in the middle and roasted. After Zhang Yan read it, he first revealed a thoughtful expression, and then he smiled slightly. He shook his hand and the letter turned into a ball of ash. Target equals _blank. Chapter 275. Date, October 2nd. More good novels, TXT download. Please go search, comma. A dark-skinned Taoist with a strong physique was sitting on a rock, breathing in essence qi and regulating his breathing. In front of him was a vast expanse of smoky waves, raging winds, and turbid waves that rose into the sky. Under the water, there were many faintly discernible huge figures. Just from the roars they made, one could tell how much power was hidden in their bodies. However, they were all locked by the Yunyang gold lock and could not move at all. The dark-faced Taoist sat there for a whole day. When the sun was about to set, he opened his eyes and shouted, "Release the lock." There were a few strong men standing in front of a row of capstans on the shore. When they heard this, they didn't dare to delay and immediately went up to grab the handles. They exerted their strength to push the capstans, and with a series of creaking sounds, the chains on the capstans began to descend. As the shackles loosened, the huge black shadow seemed to wake up from a deep sleep. It let out a rumbling roar and stirred up the waves. With a bang, half of its body came out of the water, revealing its original appearance. It was a ferocious-looking dragon whale. It had a turtle neck, a carp tail, a jade-toed head, long whiskers under its chin, sharp teeth, a wide back and a large fin, black scales and a white belly. This was a fierce beast in the water. If it lived for 10,000 years, it could summon the rain and thunder, gather the wind and clouds, and stir up the four seas. The one in front of him was only 15 feet long. It seemed to be only 100 years old. The dark-faced Taoist pulled himself together and stood up. He tied his hair into a bun, tied the silk belt around his waist, rolled up his sleeves, and revealed his arms. Then, he suddenly let out a shout. A stream of white smoke suddenly flew out from the top of his head and poured into the sea. It spun like a ribbon, like a silk net, opened and closed, and actually tied up the dragon whale tightly. As soon as it escaped from the cage, it was bound again. The dragon whale was naturally furious. It struggled with all its might. The smoke was sometimes thick and sometimes thin. It seemed like it was about to break. The dark-faced Taoist frowned slightly. He took a deep breath and made a hand sign. Dense smoke rose from the top of his head. The white smoke grew even stronger. As he operated his Xian Qi, the dragon whale was pressed down again. When it reached the bottom of the water, no matter how it struggled, it could not escape from the white smoke. The wind and waves on the lake also stopped. He gradually calmed his breathing. After a while, he shouted in a deep voice, "Release another one." Those strong men went to another capstan and loosened the chains. The seawater splashed, and the cry of another dragon whale came from under the water. The dark-faced Taoist snorted and changed his hand sign. A white smoke flew out from the top of his head and fell on the dragon whale. In the blink of an eye, it was pressed down to the bottom of the water. In the blink of an eye, it was pressed down to the bottom. The veins on his forehead were throbbing, and beads of sweat had appeared on his forehead. It was obvious that he was feeling a little strenuous, but he didn't seem to think it was enough. After a while, his eyes lit up, and he shouted, "Release again." With a rumbling sound, the capstan moved again. Another dragon whale was released from the cloud sun golden lock and flopped around in the water. The black-faced Taoist wore a serious expression. His body swayed and another plume of white smoke appeared. The smoke streaked through the air towards the third dragon whale. However, under his suppression, this dragon whale was not as tamed as the previous two. It suddenly let out an earth-shaking roar and suddenly set off waves that were dozens of feet high. The waves were like snow and scattered pearls. Waves after waves of water hit the shore. The Taoist's face turned red. Although he still stood still, he clenched his teeth and held his breath. The hair on his head trembled slightly. It was obvious that he was struggling. The dragon whale struggled repeatedly. The white smoke gradually thinned and showed signs of dispersing. The Taoist was not willing to give up. He made a few hand signs and finally stabilized the white smoke. While he was trying to subdue this dragon whale, the other two dragon whales were also not willing to give up. They also struggled with all their strength. Inevitably, the Taoist couldn't bear the pressure anymore. He was also a tough man. He bit the tip of his tongue and squeezed out a bit of his blood. Suddenly, the profound qi in his abdomen seemed to be regenerated. He took a deep breath and kept urging his spiritual power. Waves after waves of power came and pressed the dragon whale into the water. When the sky turned completely dark, lanterns were propped up on the shore. There were thousands of bean-sized flames that connected together, illuminating the entire stretch of beach. Although the flames shook violently, they did not extinguish under the fierce sea breeze. Meanwhile, the battle between the black-faced Taoist and the three dragon whales had also reached the final juncture. As he continuously whittled them down, he finally gained the upper hand. The last dragon whale was exhausted, and it let out an unwilling roar as it was heavily pressed into the bottom of the water. At this moment, the dark-faced Taoist was already panting and sweating. He shouted in a hoarse voice, "Retract." The strong men hurriedly retracted the capstans. With the sound of chains grinding, the three dragon whales were tied up again. They were no longer as powerful as before. The dark-faced Taoist let out a sigh of relief. He wanted to stand up, but as soon as he tried, he felt his limbs become weak. He knew that it was because he had used too much spiritual power and profound qi. He hurriedly sat down and adjusted his breathing a few times. When he felt that he had recovered some of his energy, he slowly stood up. At this moment, the wind suddenly blew in the sky. A wisp of smoke came out of nowhere and floated in the air. Then, the smoke parted, and a young man walked out. He was wearing a golden hat and long sleeves. He was wearing cloud boots and long sleeves. There was a silk belt around his waist. He had a pair of pearls dangling from his temples. He laughed and said, "Ko 12th Lang, you can fight with the three dragon whales." When the dark-faced Taoist saw this person, he hurriedly bowed and said, "Ah, it's senior brother Zheng. Junior brother Ko Yangchen greets you." After a pause, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said, "Senior brother, you're flattering me. We're both 6th grade Dan, but senior brother Su can fight with 4 dragon whales at the same time. I'm far behind him." The Dan grading assembly was to measure the strength of the disciples Dan. Dan's strength was the foundation of one's spiritual power. No matter how powerful one was, if the strength of the Dan was not enough, one would not be able to use its power. The higher the grade of the Dan, the stronger the spiritual power. However, if a cultivator had the perseverance and hard work, they could slightly increase the strength of the Dan. The well-dressed young man nodded in agreement. He said, "Senior brother Su is not bad, but he's a little arrogant. For this Dan grading assembly, we, the 12 houses, have invited many friends from the same path. When the time comes, there will be a gathering of heroes. It'll be hard for him to stand out." The dark-faced Taoist was stunned. He said in surprise, "Will disciples from other sects come to our Qinsang school's Dan grading assembly this time?" The well-dressed young man laughed and said, "I heard from the elders in my clan that the 9 major sects will also have disciples coming to observe the assembly tomorrow." The Dark Azure sect's pill grading conclave had been going on for 100 years. Under the impetus of the 5 great families, the 12 houses invited their good friends and relatives in the various sections. Major sects like the Shaoqing sect and the Jade Knight sect also sent invitations, inviting their disciples to come and observe the conclave. Shaoqing sect, Yuxiao sect, and Qinsang school were the three major sects in the Donghua continent. They had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. If disciples from these two sects came, the other sects would not sit still and do nothing. They would definitely send disciples as well. As a result, it became a grand event before the sword battle between the 16 sections. The well-dressed young man said loudly, as disciples from the Xianmen clans of Qinsang school, we must show off our heroism in this assembly and not let the other sects look down on us. Clans valued their reputation. If they could bring glory to their clan in one fell swoop at the assembly, they would definitely be valued by the clan, and their future cultivation would definitely be smooth. As the dark-faced Taoist listened, he also felt a surge of energy in his chest. He said excitedly, Senior Marshal Brother Zheng is right. Right at this moment, they heard the sound of a silver bell. The two of them couldn't help but turn around to look. It was a young girl in a green dress with her hair combed into a cloud bun. She walked over cheerfully, and there were a few young cultivators by her side. It was obvious that these people were trying to curry favor with these women and flatter them. The well-dressed young man glanced sideways and chuckled. It's the young lady from the Han family. She's quite pretty. The dark-faced Taoist stood at the side woodenly and pretended that he did not hear that. The young girl in the green dress turned around and saw the well-dressed young man. Her beautiful eyes also lit up. She pushed through the crowd and came before him. She said crisply, Are you Zheng Yinggij from the Zheng family? The well-dressed young man stood with his hands behind his back and chuckled. That's me. What? Young Lady Han also knows my name. I'm really flattered. The young girl in the green dress's beautiful eyes sparkled. She said, I heard that elder ancestor of the Zheng family praised you for your success in concocting medicine. I wonder what grade your medicine is. The well-dressed young man laughed and suddenly took a step forward. He stretched out his finger and hooked it on the young girl's smooth and round chin. He teased, Young Lady Han, you're so beautiful. If you let me hug you, I'll tell you. What do you think? The young girl in the green dress was startled at first, as if she did not dare to believe that he would do such a thing. Then, her cheeks instantly blushed. She took a few steps back and said angrily with embarrassment, You're so rude. She stomped her feet and covered her face. She turned around and ran away in a ray of light. The people who came with her were instantly flustered. They glared at the well-dressed young man but did not bother to tangle with him. They hurriedly called out and chased after her. The well-dressed young man stared at her back and sneered. He said mockingly, You're too young. You want to know my background? Don't even think about it. Do you think I don't know what the Han family is planning? Let's compete in the pill grading assembly. The black-faced Taoist was dumbfounded. He said with a trembling voice, Senior Marshal Brother Zheng, she's from the Han family. The well-dressed young man said carelessly, So what? Now that they still need our Zheng clan, they won't come to make things difficult for us at this time. Since they've delivered themselves to our doorstep, if we don't conveniently take advantage of them, it would be too inexcusable. Moreover, if this pill grading conference is held properly, our Zheng clan's reputation will not be weaker than those 5 clans. The black-faced Taoist smiled bitterly. He said, The Zheng family is the head of the 12 great families. Senior Marshal Brother Zheng, you're also the disciple of perfected cultivator Chen. It's different. The well-dressed young man curled his lips and said unhappily, I don't like what you're saying. Although birth is given by God, there's only so much. If you don't fight for it, and fight for it, are you really going to wait for it to fall from the sky? Look at that deep ravine. Wasn't it Senior Marshal Brother Su who fought his way down? If he hibernated in the clan and only listened to the arrangements of the higher-ups, how could he have had the chance to reach out? The black-faced Taoist was silent. Although he was from the Ko family, he was only a disciple of a side branch. Even if he agreed with the young man, it was not appropriate for him to say anything. Otherwise, he would definitely cause trouble. However, he also clenched his fists and secretly made up his mind to fight for a seat in the pill grading assembly. There are more interesting novels. Download please go soak, comma. Target equals _blank. Chapter 276. In front of the mysterious water-true palace, bamboos brushed the clouds, pine and cypress trees supported the sun, a cool and gentle breeze came and went, thousands of lights flowed in the blue sky, the colors intertwined, the bright ripples of the rainbow. In the middle of the cool water surface, there was a spring slowly rising up, flowing up to the sky, like a jade dragon spitting water. It bloomed with auspicious light, only 3 feet high. A few auspicious clouds piled up at the end of the water. Qi Yuntian sat on it, wearing a pure yang scarf and a feather cloak. The corners of his clothes fluttered freely in the wind. One of his hands was pressing on the empty space, and as his hand moved, the lake and sea seemed to be breathing, moving up and down, up and down. Fan Changqing stood at a distance, not daring to disturb him. After a while, Qi Yuntian withdrew his hand, dispelled the spell, and calmed the water. He then turned around and smiled. Junior brother Fan, how was your trip? Compared to 20 years ago, his temperament was more serious. When he looked over, it was like the mountains were moving together, looking down at the common people. Although Fan Changqing could see him from time to time, his breath was slightly stagnant. He cupped his hands and said, as senior brother expected, junior brother Zhang really succeeded in concocting medicine and achieved Jindan. Qi Yuntian nodded slightly, and a deep brilliance appeared in his eyes. Did you see clearly? What grade of junior brother Zhang Yan's Dan? Fan Changqing replied cautiously, in junior brother's opinion, junior brother Zhang's Dan should be above the 6th grade, no higher than the 4th grade, but, Qi Yuntian said with a smile, but what? A smile also appeared on Fan Changqing's chubby face as he said, junior brother Zhang always does unexpected things and cannot be judged by common sense. Therefore, what I saw might not be true. Qi Yuntian revealed a look of deep thought, and Fan Changqing looked at his expression, and carefully added, senior brother, junior brother thinks that people like junior brother Zhang are somewhat similar to junior brother Ning. They are ambitious, but they know how to hide their sharpness, and plan before making a move. So we can only let them go, and not control them. Qi Yuntian laughed out loud, and shook his sleeves. Junior brother Fan is right. Junior brother Zhang must have his own considerations. Since he has great ambitions, why should we restrict him? Moreover, I also want to see exactly how far he can go. Fan Changqing heaved a sigh of relief. For many years, he had been roaming around the sect on behalf of Qi Yuntian, winning over people's hearts. With his foresight, he could tell that Zhang Yan was extraordinary and could not be treated lightly. Therefore, Qi Yuntian wanted to keep Zhang Yan by his side and manipulate him like a chess piece. This was disadvantageous to both sides, but from the looks of it, Qi Yuntian was indeed worthy of being the 3rd-generation disciple. He was magnanimous, able to restrain himself and was not narrow-minded at all. He hesitated for a moment, then said, when I came here, junior brother, I heard news from the aristocratic families that they're going to hold some pill grading assembly. Qi Yuntian pondered for a moment. He said nonchalantly, the general trend is with me. Even if there are occasional waves, so what? Don't worry about it. Let them be. Fan Changqing nodded and said no more. In just a few days, the news that the 12 houses wanted to hold the pill grading assembly, led by Lady Zheng, spread throughout the sect. The disciples discussed the matter and were all excited. However, those with eyes could see why the aristocratic families did this. The strange thing was that the master and disciple did not say anything about it, and no one came out to stop them. It was as if they were letting them do what they wanted. This way, the assembly naturally went smoothly. In less than half a month, the date was set. At this time, an invitation for the pill grading assembly was sent to Zhang Yan. He took the letter and read it. His eyes flashed. As a direct disciple, how could he not go to the pill grading assembly? The aristocratic families had specially sent this invitation letter to put him in the open. If he didn't go, his reputation would definitely take a huge hit, and he would suffer a disastrous decline. He could not help but laugh and throw the letter to the side. At this time, there was a ripple in the small mirror beside him, and a voice said, "Master, there are 2 elders from Shangming Temple outside the door." Zhang Yan looked and saw 2 white-haired, sage-like Daoran people in the mirror. He realized that they were actually familiar people. He thought for a moment and said, "Please." He stood up and took a step forward. From the 12th floor of the palace, he went straight to the hall on the 1st floor and sat cross-legged on the jade couch. Not long after, Shang brought the 2 elders in. Zhang Yan did not get up, he smiled and cupped his fists, "So it's Elder Hu and Elder Hua. Both of you are not cultivating in Shangming Court, but have come to my residence. What brings you here?" These 2 Taoists were Hu Zhili and Hu Zhiqi. They had tried to threaten Zhang Yan on Bamboo Island, but their beards were cut off by his sword and they left in a sorry state. Now that they were here, they naturally didn't have any good expressions on their faces. Although these 2 were only at the mystic light realm, they had the identity of Shangming Temple's elders and the support behind them. Therefore, they were not afraid of Zhang Yan, who was at the transformation core realm. Hua Zhiqi said with a cold expression, "Zhang Yan, we are here today on the orders of a senior brother in the sect to tell you that you cannot go to the pill grading assembly." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Seeing the 2's serious expressions, he found it funny and asked, "Why?" Hu Zhili snorted and said mockingly, "Zhang Yan, don't think that we don't know that you are only a disciple who has formed a 5th or 6th grade core at most. If you go to the assembly, you will only bring shame to our sect. You might as well not go." Hua Zhiqi did not wait for Zhang Yan to speak. He threw down a talisman and scolded, "Take this talisman to the wild dragon swamp shell field and guard it for a few days. When the assembly closes, find a chance to come back. There will be benefits for you. Otherwise, someone will come to deal with you. At that time, it will not be up to you." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and reached out, taking the talisman into his hand. Hu Zhili and Hua Zhiqi looked at each other and were both proud. There were junior disciples in the sect who called Zhang Yan the #1 direct disciple in 100 years. In their eyes, what #1 in 100 years? Under this kind of pressure, wouldn't he still have to bow his head? Who knew that in the next moment, their expressions would change? They saw the talisman turn into fine powder that flowed through the gaps between Zhang Yan's fingers and sprinkled on the ground. They heard him say coldly, "The 2 of you are just elders of Shangming Hall. You have cultivated for hundreds of years, but you are only at the mystic light realm. You are just sitting there, eating and waiting to die. How can you have the power to control me? Get out." He waved his sleeve and a gust of wind instantly blew in the main hall. The 2 of them did not expect Zhang Yan to turn hostile just like that. They were instantly shocked and wanted to say something. However, they suddenly felt their vision go black and they lost consciousness. When they woke up again, they realized that they were lying at the bottom of Zhaoyu Mountain. Their hair was messy and their clothes were in tatters. They looked like beggars. The 2 of them crawled up while trembling and said in a loud voice toward Zhaoyu Mountain, "Zhang Yan, we will tell you the truth. Even if you want to go to the elixir gathering, you might not be able to leave the mountain." When these words were said, a breeze suddenly swept through the sky. The 2 of them jumped in fright. They thought that Zhang Yan was going to attack again and hurriedly rode on their mystic light, covering their heads and scurrying away. Lu Yenny, who was standing in the clouds, smiled lightly and returned to the main hall. She said, "Teacher, those 2 old things have left. However, from what they said, it seems that they have a backup plan." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You do not need to care about this matter. Teacher has his own plans. You may leave." Lu Yenny bowed and retreated. Zhang Yan returned to the main residence. He closed his eyes and went to meditate. Half a month passed like this, but the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake was still calm and nothing strange happened. However, on the day of the pill grading assembly, 2 young Taoists came to the mountain gate of the Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake. They sat on the mountain peak and did not say a word. They only looked at the mountain gate of the Heavenly Lake. One of them was wearing a crown of stars and wearing a feather robe. There was a white feather flying hawk at his feet. Zhang Yan had seen this person before. It was Ren Mingyao, who had gone to the Southern Waves swamp with him to exterminate demons. He was an in-name disciple under Meng Zhen. The other person had a mediocre appearance. He wore a tall crown and wore a green Taoist robe. However, his eyes were unusually lively and full of splendor. It was hard to forget. This time, they had been entrusted by a senior brother to come here to stop that Zhang Yan from going to the pill grading assembly. Actually, Hu Zhili and Hu Zhiqi could not see through the deeper meaning of this, but as disciples of the same master and disciple, how could they not understand? No matter what grade Zhang Yan's pill was, whether it was high or low, if he appeared at the pill grading assembly, he would either lose face or become famous. But no matter which result it was not what that senior brother wanted to see. When the two of them sat in the corner, they suddenly saw the water of the heavenly lake shake. The array door opened and a white mist rushed out, wanting to go to the mountain gate of the Qinsang school. Ren Mingyao's eyes narrowed. He knew that Zhang Yan had come out. He immediately shook his sleeves and stood up. He stepped on the flying hawk and blocked in front of him. He shouted, "Senior brother Zhang, wait." At the same time, the other Taoist with a high crown also arrived on the smoke. Without saying a word, he stood on the other side and surrounded Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan did not seem surprised at all. He looked calm and said with a smile, "So it's senior brother Ren. What is the meaning of this?" Ren Mingyao said in a low voice, "Senior brother Zhang, we have also been entrusted by someone to stop you here. I hope you will not make things difficult for us. If you can turn back, we will not insist on going against you." Although he didn't have much contact with Zhang Yan, he knew that Zhang Yan wasn't a person who would submit easily and wouldn't be swayed by words. In the past, he had once been suppressed by Zhang Yan, so he came here this time with the intention to compete with Zhang Yan. The other Taoist with a tall crown stared at Zhang Yan with a burning gaze. It seemed that if he did not agree, he would immediately attack. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "If that's the case, then there's no need for more words. Let's fight." His eyes suddenly turned cold. He hadn't made a move yet, but his aura surged. When the two of them sensed his aura, they suddenly felt chills all over their bodies. It was as if the person in front of them was more than 10 times more dangerous than before. They felt an inexplicable panic in their hearts, and their expressions changed greatly as they both retreated. At this moment, Ren Mingyao knew that Zhang Yan was not as simple as he thought. He did not dare to think of fighting alone and shouted, "Junior brother Huang, let's fight together." However, just now they were about to move, a vast sword light cut through the void and flew from the sky. The two Taoists only saw the brilliance in front of them and thousands of sword chi fell down. The cold air was overflowing and the cold light was pressing on their necks. It seemed that their heads would be cut off by the sword at any time. They quickly retreated in horror. Ren Mingyao had not recovered from the shock. His throat moved and he said dryly, "Senior brother Ning." The mist and clouds parted and Ning Chongxian stepped out of the void. His clothes were fluttering in the wind. He stood in front of them like a sword. He glanced at them coldly and said, "Junior brother Zhang, go ahead. I'll see who dares to stop you." Zhang Yan smiled and bowed to Ning Chongxian. He did not say much and left on the cloud, turning into a white smoke and disappearing. Under Ning Chongshuan's gaze, Ren Mingxiao and the Taoist with a tall crown did not dare to move. They looked at each other helplessly and could only watch Zhang Yan leave. To be continued, target equals _blank. Chapter 277. At the east of the dark azure sex lake dragon abyss, there was a towering cliff that stood on a circular wall, like a crescent moon that encircled the seawater and embraced it within its bosom. This place was called Furious Wave Cliff, and every time the mighty force of the water surged over, it would slap onto the reef and give rise to thousands of white waves, causing it to be a magnificent sight. Since the Pilgrade gathering had started, disciples from influential families below the 12 great houses in the Chinsung school who wanted to see the grand occasion of the Pilgrade gathering came here. There were more than 10,000 people. However, those junior disciples who were still unable to fly could only stand outside the high cliff, filling up the dozen or so boulders outside the Furious Waves cliff. They were sweating like rain and breathing like clouds as they stretched their necks to look into the distance. The disciples from the Bright Energy sect were all sitting on magical flying ships that floated in the sky like stars. Above their heads were the hundreds of disciples from the Mystic Light sect, and they were all calling their friends as they moved about. Colorful lights flashed, and the rainbow-colored lights formed clouds. Further up, there were 40 to 50 core transformation realm cultivators. All of them were sitting in flying carriages. There were servants, maids, and strong men moving back and forth, carrying immortal wine, fruits, and exotic delicacies. There were also people who were familiar with each other and built a golden bridge. They joined each other and toasted each other from afar. When one looked at it from afar, they could see smoke rising and condensing into the clouds. The disciples of influential families were strictly divided into ranks. They stood in their own world according to their family's name and cultivation. They didn't dare to overstep the rules. The highest point was above the clouds. Rainbows shone brilliantly here, thousands of flowers fluttered about, and fallen petals prowled about. It was an extraordinary sight. The head of the Zheng family, Zheng Hongtu, spiritual master Zheng, sat on a copper couch supported by 12 dragon geese. The couch was decorated with precious jade, lamps, corals, and colorful pearls. The top was covered with an umbrella and the bottom was tied with fragrant silk. Behind it was a fan made of white jade that was dozens of feet wide. It was like a half-moon embedded in the blue sky. There were tens of thousands of pearls and thousands of auspicious qi. The atmosphere was magnificent. Zheng Hongtu sat in the middle of the main seat. The people sitting on both sides were the patriarchs of the Du family and the Feng family. Although there were people from the other families here, they weren't Yuanying spiritual masters. Therefore, he didn't have the qualifications to stand side by side with them. Apart from the three of them, there were two unfamiliar Yuanying perfected beings sitting on the flying banquet. When the people below looked over, they saw that one of them had his hair tied into two buns and was wearing a dark green robe. There was a black silk sash around his waist, and he held a carved jade scepter in his hand. However, his face was blurry, and his face could not be seen clearly. The other Taoist master was tall and straight. He had nothing on him and wore a plain Taoist robe. His sleeves were empty, and with just a few glances, everyone would feel as if their eyes were being pricked by needles, and they had no choice but to avert their gazes. The disciples below were all whispering to each other, trying to find out who these two people were. A disciple who recognized the two didn't dare to point at them. He just lowered his head and whispered to the people around him, the one with the Rui scepter. It was Tian Jinren of Yuxiao School. That Tian family and Du family were in-laws. That was why they were invited to this Dharma assembly. He glanced at the plain-robed Taoist and quickly retracted his gaze. He said carefully, and that person is Shaoqing sect's Su Jinren. She is a female cultivator. I heard that just now she achieved Yuanying realm, so she isn't famous. Everyone came to a realization. However, they didn't expect that skinny and tall Su Jinren was actually a female cultivator. Some curious people took a few more glances, but they all cried from the pain, so they didn't dare to look anymore. Other than these 5 Yuanying spiritual masters, not far away, there was a white-haired Daoren. He sat alone in a corner and drank by himself. His expression wasn't too good. This person was Elder Gong of Shangming Courtyard, and he was also a disciple of master and disciple. After the matter of the middle grade Dharma assembly spread, although the disciples of master and disciple also wanted to come and gain experience, they were all ordered by their masters to stay in the sect and not go. However, this was the middle grade Dharma assembly of Chinsung school after all. The disciples of master and disciple couldn't not come, so they pushed Elder Gong, who had always been at odds with his peers and had the longest lifespan, to come. When he found out that Zhang Yan was the only one who would come to this meeting, he was sure that he would be ridiculed by others. It was an extremely shameful thing to do, so he refused to come no matter what. How could the sect leader insist that he come? He really could not refuse, so he had no choice but to come. Right now, he could only drink his wine and not talk to the people from the aristocratic families. In his heart, he was cursing the people who had caused him to come here one after another. That finely dressed youth also controlled a flying tower and placed it in the northeast corner, faintly separating himself from the crowd. He circled a large area and didn't allow others to come close. With his identity as a member of the Zheng clan and the person who was destined to grade the pills today, no one came to fight with him and they all avoided him. Now that the assembly hadn't started, he had already eaten and drunk to his heart's content. The table was already overturned with cups and pots, and the fragrance of wine filled the air. It was a mess, and the sleeves of his robe were stained. Although he was a disciple of the Zheng clan, he had always been independent and never cared about the rules and customs of the clan. However, at this moment, the person sitting at the table and drinking with him was shivering with a pale face, unable to let go of his hands and feet. This person was a disciple of the Du clan, but he was only in the meridian opening realm. He didn't know the finely dressed youth at first, but when he passed by, he saw that his nostrils were very big and he looked interesting, so he dragged this person up to drink with him. The finely dressed youth played with a wine cup with a dragon engraved on it and looked at the few spiritual masters in the sky with half-narrowed eyes. He sighed and said, "I wonder when I can sit on that seat." He stretched out his hand and pointed at the few spiritual masters one by one. Suddenly, he turned his head and said to the Du clan disciple, "Do you believe that in less than 300 years, I will trample all of these old fellows under my feet?" The Du clan disciple was terrified when he heard this. His face was pale and his body was stiff. He wished he could plug his ears. At this moment, a figure flew in from outside and stood still on the second floor. He dispersed the smoke around him and walked in with steady footsteps. Coincidentally, he heard the finely dressed youth's words and paused. He said in a low voice, "Erlang, you're drunk." The finely dressed youth suddenly straightened his body and said with a frown, "It's Brother Sun." "Strange, when did you condense your pill?" Zheng Sun walked in and sat down at the side. He said in a low voice, "Yesterday." The finely dressed youth glanced sideways and gave the Du clan disciple a look to get out. As if he had been pardoned, the person scrambled out. He raised the wine cup in his hand and drank it in one gulp. He asked, "What grade is your pill?" Zheng Sun was silent for a while before saying, "5th grade pill." With a paw, the finely dressed youth threw the wine cup at his feet and scolded, "Are those old fellows crazy? With your talent, you can at least reach grade 4 after 1 or 2 years. Why are you in such a rush? Is it because of this bullshit spell gathering?" Zheng Sun slowly shook his head and revealed a bitter smile. He said, "That's not the case. It's because that Zhang Yan and I once cultivated in the lower house, and this little brother was the first senior brother of the Good Abyss Temple. The face of the clan is important." The finely dressed youth only laughed coldly after hearing this. He understood why the clan was in such a rush. Zheng Sun and Zhang Yan were both from the lower house of the Good Abyss Monastery, and Zheng Sun had even entered the upper house a few days earlier than Zhang Yan. However, Zhang Yan was the first to successfully concoct the pill, and he was inferior to him. This wouldn't have been a big deal normally, but now that Zhang Yan had refined the pill during the low-grade pill gathering, if the other clans knew that Zheng Sun was still a mystic light realm cultivator, where would the Zheng clan put their face? Originally, Zheng Sun's Xian art focused on stability, and he walked the path of cultivation step by step. When the time was right, success would naturally follow. However, before the time was right, he had already formed the pill. This action was like pulling a seedling to help it grow, and all his previous efforts would be wasted. However, for the sake of the clan's reputation, they couldn't care about anything else. Because a disciple of the clan had died, Zheng Sun had opened an inferior grade meridian with the help of the Zheng clan, allowing him to enter the upper house early to cultivate. He had also inherited the legacy of this disciple. He originally thought that the path of cultivation would be smooth, but now he had to make a sacrifice. It could be said that his success was because of his clan, and his failure was also because of his clan. If the disciples of the aristocratic families hadn't reached an extremely high realm in their cultivation, then they would have to put the family first. The young man in the beautiful clothes hated this to the bone. However, when he thought about it again, if it wasn't for that damnable Zhang Yan, how could it have ended up like this? It was clearly this person who had forced Zheng Sun to this point. He snorted coldly and said fiercely, "Brother Sun, don't worry. If that Zhang Yan dares to come to the Pill Grade Assembly today, watch how I humiliate him and help you vent your anger." Right at this moment, the sound of a jade chime and golden bell rang out beside their ears. It was clear and melodious, and it instantly spread throughout the mountain gate. It reverberated on Furious Waves Crag, and even drowned out the sound of the tide. This was already the second time the chime had rung. If it was the third time, the Pill Grade Assembly would begin. However, up until now, everyone still hadn't seen Zhang Yan's figure. One of the disciples below laughed and said, "Why isn't this Zhang Yan here yet? Could it be that he's afraid?" Someone teased, "My clan is full of talents, how can the lineage of master and disciple compare to us? If I were him, I'd simply hide in the turtle manor and not come out. Why come here and make a fool of myself?" This was a mockery of the fact that Bright Nether Heavenly Lake was originally the abode of the great demon, Gui Zongyao. It was just that there was a hint of jealousy in his words, but it caused everyone to roar with laughter. However, just as the laughter rang out, a sword light that traversed the blue sky flew over from the horizon with the momentum of a shocking rainbow. At first, it still seemed to be at the horizon, but in a few flashes, it had already arrived. That dense sword light seemed to be pressing on one's eyebrows, causing one to be unable to help but want to take a few steps back to avoid it. The disciples standing on Furious Waves Crag instantly felt their breathing become sluggish, and their laughter also stopped abruptly. That situation was as if a sword had flown over and suppressed all of them, causing them to fall silent. Spiritual Master Su, who was seated at the banquet, was originally silent, but he suddenly straightened his voice and muttered to himself, "Flying sword?" When the sword light dispersed, Zhang Yan walked out from within. He stood in the air and cupped his hands in greeting, saying with a smile, "I've troubled everyone to wait for so long. Forgive Zhang Yan for coming late." The myriad of gazes in the surroundings swept towards him in unison, and this action wasn't inferior to 1,000 swords pointing at him in unison. At this moment, it was equivalent to him facing these clans and over 10,000 cultivators by himself. However, he acted as if he didn't see them at all, and his expression was calm and composed as he sat down cross-legged on the cloud. His movements were carefree and unrestrained, and he didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. Although he was a master and disciple, his bearing and demeanor made many disciples admire him, and there was no lack of people secretly cheering for him. When Elder Gong saw Zhang Yan, he originally wanted to call Zhang Yan over to his side. But after opening his mouth, he didn't say anything. He sighed in his heart, "This Zhang Yan is really courageous. It's a pity that the elites of this generation are all here. Even if this Zhang Yan can win against one or two of them, how can he win against all of them? It's always about losing. Target equals _blank. Chapter 278. After the third bell chime sounded, incense was burned and prayers were offered to the ancestors. A Taoist dressed in Taoist robes, wearing a lotus crown, and holding a jade tablet came out after a bath of incense. He gave a speech and read aloud. Then the zither and flute played in unison, sprinkling colorful petals and clean water. The pill grading conference was about to begin. The leader of the Zheng clan, Zheng Hongtu, stood up slowly and said, "The preparations were made in a hurry. The ceremony is simple and crude. I hope everyone does not mind." All the enlightened masters stood up and returned the greeting. They said it was fine. After a few more polite words, they sat down just now. Zheng Hongtu had a smile on his face. He took out a white jade scroll from his sleeve, held it up in his hand, and said loudly, "This item is a bushel of origin-leaving essence jade. It took my Zheng clan several hundred years of hard work to gather it. Today, if any disciple surpasses his peers and comes out on top, he can take this item away." As soon as these words came out, it immediately caused an uproar. The people below were buzzing, and the leisurely core transformation stage disciples on the flying tower were all dumbstruck. Some of the cultivators who had long since reached the second stage of the core formation stage beat their chests and stamped their feet after a moment of shock, secretly blaming themselves for not having such a situation when they formed the core formation stage. After a cultivator formed their core, they needed to gather the essence of the 5 elements and contain the evil energy of the earth to nourish the golden core. Most cultivators needed to go through dozens or even hundreds of years of hard work until the core could no longer be increased. Just now, they began to try to step into the second realm. The origin-leaving essence jade was also known as a great medicine. It was an extremely rare spiritual item in this world. It was one of the few medicines that could increase the core's power. When this item was born, it did not need to touch the sky, the earth, the rain, the dust, or the sound of it. It was best if it could not be seen. Zheng Hongtu said that he had collected this piece of origin-leaving essence jade for hundreds of years. He was not lying at all. The 5 perfected beings present were shocked. They did not expect Zheng Hongtu to be so generous. For the sake of this assembly, he had really put in a lot of effort. If it were not for the fact that they had reached the nascent soul realm, they would have already reached the nascent soul realm. They would probably be envious. Elder Gong muttered a few words. No one knew what he said. Zhang Yan glanced at the dove a few times. He also understood the value of this item. His eyebrows raised slightly, but a faint smile floated from the corners of his mouth. Zheng Hongtu smiled when he saw the crowd's excitement. With a wave of his hand, a Taoist wearing a tall hat and a cold expression stepped out of the smoke. On the beach, there was a huge rock protruding from the ground. The Taoist stood on top of it and sang loudly, "Today is the Dark Azure Sect's Pill Grading Assembly. Among the true disciples of the sect, anyone who succeeds in forming a pill within 10 years, you can all come and weigh yourselves." As soon as he finished speaking, a disciple dressed in a red robe with his hair tied up in a bun responded and shouted, "I'll give it a try." This person waved his sleeves and leaped out from the flying building. In a flash, he arrived at the bottom of the cliff of the Furious Waves cliff and stood still on the beach. He first bowed to the spiritual masters before turning around. He looked to the side. On the wet beach in front of him, there were a total of 81 copper balls. All of them were pressed into the sand. Looking closely, one could see that they were formed by 2 yin and yang copper fish hugging together. They were like one ball. Each of these items weighed 3,000 caddies. Copper was gold, fish was dan. When the 2 were combined, it represented the golden dan. The power of a dan was measured by this item. The red-robed disciple took 2 steps forward under the gaze of the crowd. His expression was a little nervous. After hesitating for a moment, he took a few steps back and went to the praying mat on the side to adjust his breathing. After a few breaths, he stood up, clenched his fists, and shouted in a low voice. A wisp of smoke rose from the halos. After being controlled by his mind, it fell down and instantly covered one of the copper fish. That wisp of smoke slowly moved on top of it. Suddenly, he let out a "hey" sound and lifted the smoke up, lifting it up and suspending it in the air. That wisp of smoke relaxed and slowly spread outwards. As the wisp of white smoke passed by, the copper fish that were deep in the mud were lifted up one by one. This made the disciples who only cared about watching the show to cheer and shout. When it came to 10 copper fish, he was obviously struggling. After clenching his teeth and struggling for a while, he finally lifted another 2 copper fish. In total, there were 12 copper fish floating above his head. Zhang Yan could see clearly from the air. Speaking of which, the weight of each drop of the serene heavy water in his energy sea exceeded that of the copper fish below. However, this water was painstakingly refined and condensed. When it flew, it consumed vital energy and also needed a spell to control it. To put it bluntly, it was actually a Dao technique. As for the yin and yang copper balls, it was purely captured by the power of a Dan. If the power of a Dan evolved into a supernatural power, it would not be a problem to shatter these copper balls. Therefore, the two could not be compared. Zheng Hongtu took a few glances at the cloud couch and asked, "Who is this?" Immediately, an attendant disciple came up and said, "This is Lin Yu from the Lin clan." Zheng Hongtu nodded and said, "To be able to take 12 yin and yang copper fish out of thin air, it is considered a 7th grade Dan. For the 3 lower grades of yin and yang copper fish, the power of a Dan could at most increase by 12, the 3 middle grades could increase by 36, and the 3 upper grades could increase by more than 108. Lin Yu had taken 12, which was his limit. He would never be able to surpass it in his lifetime. Sitting on the seat to the left of Zheng Hongtu was the Du clan leader, Du Ruoyu. He sighed and said, "Although he is diligent, it is also a pity." Those who achieved the 3 lower grades of Dan had no hope of reaching the Great Tao. For those who achieved the 7th grade Dan, they could only cultivate Dan, refine magic tools, collect evil qi, boil the 5 essences, or watch over disciples and many other chores. Zheng Hongtu took care of the attendant disciple and said, "Look at him, it is rare. Don't disappoint him. Go, give him a cup of true sand." This Lin Yu also knew that his Dan was not of a high grade and could not be shown in public. The reason why he came up first was because someone had taken care of him. It was just to pave the way for the disciples of the big clans who came later. Originally, he did not have any other thoughts and just wanted to deal with it and then leave. He did not expect to be given a cup of true sand. He was overjoyed and repeatedly thanked him. After he left under the envious gazes, the cold-faced Taoist who was standing on the protruding boulder shouted again, "Who else?" At this moment, the expression of the black-faced Taoist sitting in a flying building changed. He thought that since he had achieved the 6th grade Dan, it should be his turn. Thus, without hesitation, he jumped up and threw himself onto the cliff. But at this moment, another person also flew out. The 2 of them landed in front of the cliff at almost the same time. They looked at each other, not expecting the other to come at the same time. The young cultivator had smooth eyebrows, bright eyes, and fair skin. He smiled and said, "Junior brother Ko, why don't you let me try first?" The black-faced Taoist sighed. "Senior brother Su's Dan power is better than mine. If you try first, how can I have the face to go up? Let me go first." Although senior brother Su also coveted the origin essence jade, he also knew that it was not his turn, so he could only fight for a good reputation in front of the other clans. However, he heard that this junior brother Ko had been diligently cultivating these days and seemed to have made some progress in Dan power. He was also worried that if the other party beat him, he would not have the face to go up again. Thus, he was not willing to give in. Sitting to the right of Zheng Hongtu was the Feng clan leader, Feng Haiqing. He had a goatee and a thin face. He had white hair and white eyebrows and looked like an old man in his 70s. Seeing that the 2 of them were not giving in, he asked with interest, "Who are these 2 people?" One of the attendant disciples bowed slightly, pointed down and said, "Reporting to master, the black-faced one is Ko clan disciple Ko Yangchen. And the white-faced one is Su clan disciple Su Zhongliu." Feng Haiqing chuckled. "Since we can't come to an agreement, let's go according to family name. The one with the lower ranking will go first. What do you think, brother Zheng?" Zheng Hongtu was fine with it and said, "All right." As soon as he said this, someone immediately passed on the message. Normally speaking, the more powerful a clan was, the higher their ranking would be. However, the Ko clan and the Su clan were ranked 9th and 10th respectively among the 12 major clans. There was only a slight difference between them, and their strength was almost the same. But since the Su clan was ranked above the Ko clan, they could only let the black-faced Taoist go first. The black-faced Taoist cupped his hands and smiled. I've taken advantage of senior brother Su. Su Zhongliu shook his head helplessly and retreated. Ko Yangchen first bowed towards the sky, then he lifted the hem of his robe and flew to the top of a reef. He looked at the huge shadows under the sea. The surrounding disciples were instantly interested. Du Ruoyu stroked his beard and smiled. Oh, is he going to subdue the dragon whale? No matter how heavy the copper fish was, it was still an inanimate object. However, the dragon whale was a living creature, and its body was huge. It could even stir up huge waves in the water. The difference in difficulty between the two could be seen at a glance. Most of the time, only cultivators who had refined their core to the top 3 grades would weigh the power of their core just now. The black-faced Taoist faced the sea breeze and took a deep breath. He shouted at the strong men on the shore, "Release 4." Su Zhongliu, who was waiting at the side, was shocked when he heard this. He couldn't help but stare closely. The strong men with bulging muscles and bare upper bodies didn't hesitate to push the capstan and release the Cloud Sun golden chains. This was also a rare sight. More than 10,000 disciples stretched their necks and watched attentively. As soon as the chains were released, the waves below started to surge. Seeing this, the black-faced Taoist didn't dare to delay. He roared and released the core fiend Qi. However, this time, he didn't subdue the dragon whales one by one like before. Instead, 4 pillars of smoke came down in one breath and pressed down on the 4 dragon whales. Several dark shadows appeared under the waves and were hit by the smoke. After a few muffled sounds, they were firmly pressed to the seabed. They couldn't move for a while. Immediately, someone cheered. After the black-faced Taoist endured for a while, his face was already red. His hands and feet were also trembling slightly. The Taoist who evaluated the Taoist jumped over to take a few glances and then nodded at him. The black-faced Taoist relaxed and retreated a few steps. His legs went soft and he almost fell to the ground. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He let out a long sigh and secretly thanked his lucky stars. Although he subdued 4 dragon whales in one breath and looked much stronger than before, in reality, he had a slight advantage. He didn't wait for the dragon whales to activate their blood vessels and recover their strength. Just now, he made his move. Strictly speaking, his core chi wasn't enough to subdue these 4 dragon whales. However, his core chi wasn't of a high grade, and no one intentionally pointed it out. The few perfected masters naturally wouldn't argue with him. Du Ruoyu praised, good, a 6th grade core chi can subdue 4 dragon whales. It's quite rare. It shows that he has been cultivating diligently. If he continues with this tenacity, he will achieve Dao one day. He glanced at Zheng Hongtu and said with a smile, since senior brother has given me a gift, I can't be a descendant. Come, bring the magic sword I used before and give it to this person. Immediately, a disciple answered and brought a magic sword with apricot yellow tassels down. After the black-faced Taoist received the sword, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He quickly bowed and thank you, perfected Master Du, for the gift. After he came down, it was Su Zhongliu's turn. The Dao grade Daoist looked in his direction. Su Zhongliu came to the cliff and took a few glances. He pondered for a moment and finally shook his head. He said to the Dao grade Daoist, no matter how hard I try, I can't beat junior brother Ko. If I go up, I will only make people laugh. It's better not to try. The black-faced Taoist was startled and said with an ashamed expression, Senior brother Su. Su Zhongliu smiled and patted him on the shoulder. Then, he floated away. The Feng clan's clan leader, Feng Haiqing, saw this and nodded. The disciples of my aristocratic families are indeed of noble character and know their own limits. His voice wasn't loud, but when it reached Elder Gong's ears, the corner of his mouth twitched and he couldn't help but snort. Feng Haiqing ignored him and turned to look at Zhang Yan. He suddenly said, Zhang Yan, how many disciples of my aristocratic families have gone down? Why don't you go and measure the core qi too? After his voice came out, it rumbled loudly, causing everyone to involuntarily focus their attention on Zhang Yan again. Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands. He replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, Perfected Master Feng, I'm afraid it's not the time yet. Feng Haiqing had heard from the Du and Jin clansmen that Zhang Yan's Dan was at least of the 6th grade or higher. Right now, his Dan was at least of the lower 3 grades. Perhaps he could still hold on, so he didn't press him any further. He chuckled and squinted his eyes, then this old man will wait here. Target equals _blank. Chapter 279. After Ko and Su went down, there were a few more disciples who could not hold back and jumped down to measure the strength of the Dan. They were also secretly competing with each other. These people were all 6th to 5th grade Dan, but they all knew their own limits. They did not dare to use the dragon whale under the sea to test their skills, and only made a fuss about the yin-yang copper fish. Zhang Yan looked carefully and found that these disciples were all from the 12 main houses, but he did not see anyone from the 46 main houses and 200 famous families. This wasn't because there hadn't been any outstanding disciples in the past 10 years, but because the 12 great houses were all 1,000-year-old clans with deep roots. It seemed like this assembly that could allow their clansmen to make a name for themselves, so they naturally didn't want the disciples of clans that were inferior to them to interfere. At this time, another person came up. This person was short and fat. He had a mustache, and his eyes were small and bright. His appearance was very comical. When he went up to the cloud, because his body was round, he looked like a meatball rolling up, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Although this person was ugly, he didn't care if people laughed at him. He walked in front of the copper fish and circled around them twice. He chuckled and a large cloud of smoke came out from his sleeves. It swirled in the air and covered the 36 copper fish. He said, "Get up." With this shout, he sucked in a breath and easily picked up the 36 copper fish. After doing this, his expression did not change. It was obvious that he was doing it with ease. A cry of surprise came from the square. Not only the few perfected masters on the clouds, but even some of the junior disciples could tell from his movements that he was not far from the 2nd stage of the core transformation realm. Feng Haiqing's white eyebrows moved slightly. He said, "Oh, Dan 4, good, and the strength of the Dan has been polished to the point of perfection. There are no flaws." "Who is this person?" Du Ruoyu interrupted with a smile, "I know this disciple. I heard that he is from the AI clan. Although he looks strange, he has some ability." The AI clan was naturally the AI clan of Anfeng, ranked last among the 12 main houses. When Zhang Yan heard this, his heart jumped. The AI clan of Anfeng? Back in the lower house. AI Zhongwen from the AI clan had some friendly relations with him. Now that 20 years had passed, this person should be able to come to the upper house. Feng Haiqing twirled his beard and nodded. "Our family has many talented people. Of course we will prosper." The perfected persons present nodded in agreement. The short and fat Taoist measured the power of the pill. He looked around proudly before leaving on a cloud. However, at this moment, no one dared to look down on him because of his appearance. However, his Dan was already at the 4th grade, if he wanted to suppress it, he would have to do so. He had to make it above the 3rd grade, so after he left, no one else entered the arena. Zheng Hongtu's gaze shifted to Zhang Yan. He said to Zhang Xian amiably, "Martial nephew Zhang, are you interested in going down to taste the pills?" Zhang Yan smiled. He said sincerely, "Zhenren Zheng, the time has not come yet. If I were to step up, I'm afraid there would be no one else after me. Feng Haiqing could not help but take another look at him, but in his heart, he mocked him, just someone who talks big. His mocking gaze intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Elder Gong, but the latter seemed to have long regarded him as deaf and blind. He pretended not to hear it and did not look over at all. Zhenren smiled and did not ask any more questions. In his opinion, Zhang Yan was just putting up a strong front. However, it did not matter. Let him be. Today, he would lose face as a master and disciple, and let the disciples of the various sects take a good look at the outstanding juniors of their families. It was not that he did not consider the possibility that Zhang Yan could make a third-grade Dan or above, but after thinking about it repeatedly, he felt that the possibility was too small. Just looking at the Qinsang school, Ning Chongxian was the only one to make a second-grade Dan in 100 years. It could be seen how difficult it was. As for making a first-grade Dan, he did not think much about it. This was not because he was too arbitrary, but because when a cultivator refined medicine to form a Dan, they would always encounter the obstacle of damaging the true qi. Perhaps it was because the true fire was not enough, or the medicinal properties were not enough, or maybe the 3 medicines were missing. In short, no matter how talented you were, when condensing the Dan, you would always encounter some kind of oversight, as if the will of the heavens was deliberately obstructing you. Since the founding of the Qinsang school, only 2 people had made a first-grade Dan. Apart from the founding master, the other person had long since left this world. After waiting for a long time, seeing that no one was coming, the well-dressed young man who had been drinking all along kicked the table and shouted, "Brother Sun, watch me vent your anger for you." His body turned into a cloud of smoke and flew out of the heaven tower, landing on the high cliff. With his hands behind his back, he raised his head and looked at Zhang Yan, saying loudly, "Zhang Yan, you are also a true disciple, why don't you have the guts to come and measure the strength of the Dan? Then are you afraid? Is everyone in your sect hiding their heads and tails like you? I am standing here today, do you dare to come down and compete with me?" Zheng Hongtu's eyes flashed, and he turned to Zhang Yan and said gently, "Nephew Zhang, don't listen to him. This is my grandnephew, Zheng Ying. He has always been arrogant, you don't have to pay attention to him." Zhang Yan faintly smiled and said, "Since this senior Zheng wants to compete with me in alchemy, I naturally won't disappoint him." Oh. Zheng Hongtu and the other perfected masters looked at each other. Zhang Yan had refused several times, and they all thought that he would continue to swallow his anger. Although he would not admit defeat verbally, he would not come down. They did not expect him to agree so readily. Zheng Hongtu looked at Zhang Yan's calm demeanor and frowned slightly. A trace of doubt arose in his heart, wondering if he had overlooked something. But now that things had come to this, it was useless to think too much about it, so he immediately threw this thought to the side. Elder Gong was also surprised. Previously, he thought that Zhang Yan was forced to come here and that the latter had made up his mind not to go down to taste the Dan. This was a countermeasure, at least he would not lose face twice. He did not think that Zhang Yan would really dare to go down. Could it be? His heart moved, and his drinking slowed down a bit. His eyes scanned back and forth between Zhang Yan's body. Since Zhang Yan had already agreed, he did not hesitate. With a wave of his sleeve, he turned into a rainbow sword and descended from the cloud. He stood in front of Zheng Ying. Outside the cliff, the tens of thousands of disciples watched him descend. They all held their breath and stared intently at the 2 figures standing on the high cliff. For a moment, it was as if only the 2 of them were left in the world. Zheng Ying looked up and down at Zhang Yan and sneered, "You have guts. Today, I..." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and interrupted him, arguing with words is useless. "Let's see who's the real deal. Junior brother Zheng, please." He had been out searching for medicine for 20 years and had experienced many battles of life and death. He had even killed Yuan Yingzhenren before. Thus, when he said this, it was really awe-inspiring. Like the clanging of metal and stone, it had a terrifying aura that could not be disobeyed. Comparing the 2, even though Zheng Ying was talented and intelligent, he had never been out in the world. However, he had never experienced the outside world before, so he appeared to be much more immature. Under Zhang Yan's scolding, his aura immediately became weak, and he was unable to say a single word. In the end, he just grunted and avoided Zhang Yan's gaze. He walked to the side with slight annoyance and shouted at the bottom of the cliff as if he was venting, "Open the locks. Open the locks, open them all for me." The spectating disciples instantly cried out in alarm. There were 9 dragon whales under the sea, and this Zhengying actually wanted to open them all at once. Could it be that he had the power to subdue the 9 whales in one fell swoop? This was not something an ordinary cultivator could do. For a moment, the shore was completely silent, and everyone stared at him. The 9 capstans turned together, and the muffled sounds were deafening. Not long after, the chains were all loosened. The 9 dragon whales were released. What kind of power was this? The surface of the sea was silent at first, but then it was as if it was crushed. There was a loud bang, and in a split second, the foam rose to the sky, and the waves rolled up to the shore. After a while, the cliff that Zhang Yan and Zhengying were standing on also felt a faint vibration. It turned out that the cliff was being repeatedly hit by the 9 fierce beasts, and the sound of hissing was getting more and more urgent, as if it was going to collapse to vent its anger. The disciples outside the cliff who could not fly heard this terrifying sound, and their faces all changed color, trembling with fear. Zhengying, on the other hand, disdained to take advantage of them like the black-faced Taoist. After the waves below surged and the dragon whale stretched its body, he sneered and glanced at Zhang Yan. Then, with a shake of his body, smoke spewed out from his body, turning into 9 streams, and fell down. As soon as the 9 pillars of smoke entered the sea, they each found a dragon whale and pressed on its huge body. The smoke seemed soft and fleeting, but it was as heavy as 10,000 kilograms. The sea suddenly split, and the 9 dragon whales kept falling down. These fierce beasts were suddenly attacked, and immediately roared and struggled. Zhengying snorted, and a captivating red flashed across his face. He made a hand sign, straightened his back, and shouted loudly. There was a muffled rumble, as if the heaven and earth were shaking, and the 9 dragon whales were actually pressed into the bottom of the sea by him. He stood straight on the cliff, motionless, leaving only his clothes fluttering in the wind. After a while, although the sea below was still surging and swaying, it could be seen that it was gradually calming down. And to the disciples on the cliff, it was as if Zhengying alone suppressed the boiling sea, and the huge waves that reached the sky. They all opened their eyes wide, and looked at him without blinking. At this stage of cultivation, he could actually use the power of a person's Dan to subdue the 9 whales. What kind of godly power was this? Their hearts were all shaken, and they were extremely shocked. Spiritual Master Tian of Yuxiao School was slightly moved, and said in a low voice, "This child is a relative of Spiritual Master Zheng? He is indeed extraordinary, to be able to subdue the 9 whales with a 3rd-grade Dan. The power of the Dan is very impressive. If he works hard, he will be able to achieve great Tao." Zheng Hongtu stroked his beard, smiled, and did not say a word. In the big families, if a disciple like this who had a 3rd-grade Dan, as long as there were no accidents, he would definitely be able to achieve great yuanying. Elder Gong's heart instantly went cold. Originally, when he saw Zhang Yan come down, he still had some hope, but seeing this, he completely lost all hope, and could only shake his head and sigh. It must be known that although there was a fine line between the 3rd-grade Dan and the 3rd-grade Dan, it was a huge chasm, and the power of the Dan that one could control was more than a few times different. And looking at Zhengying's familiar look, it was obvious that this person had long formed the Dan, but he had hibernated before, and only now did he reveal his sharpness in front of others. Who knew how many days he had been cultivating in secret? Compared to Zhengying, no matter how one looked at it, Zhang Yan did not have the advantage. The 3rd-grade Dan Daoist came up to take a few glances, and said to Zhengying, "3rd-grade Dan, you are not bad, you can stop now." Zhengying snorted and collected the smoke. Then, he turned around and looked at Zhang Yan in a provocative manner. There was a hint of arrogance in his expression. Zhang Yan smiled, turned his head to look down, and looked at the 9 dragon whales that were being locked up again, a thoughtful look in his eyes. This action fell into the eyes of others, but they thought that he had shown fear, and those who had some hope at first all shook their heads and gave up, but most people were prepared to see him make a fool of himself. The few spiritual masters looked at each other, and a smile appeared in their eyes. Elder Gong turned his face, a little unable to bear to watch. Target equals _blank. Chapter 280. Thousands of waves and thousands of reefs were trampled, and there was no regret in living a long life. The reason why Zhang Yan didn't make a sound was because Zheng Ying was right in front of him. He naturally couldn't be like this person and easily subdue the 9 dragon whale. That would be too boring. After thinking for a moment, he had an idea. A mocking expression appeared on Zheng Ying's face. Although he didn't seem to struggle when he subdued the dragon whale, that was because he had practiced hard in private for countless times. It wasn't something that could be done by anyone else. Moreover, he had subdued the 9 dragon whales in one breath. He wasn't much weaker than a second-grade core cultivator. In his mind, he had trained hard for many years, and just now, he had made a name for himself. What right did Zhang Yan have to compete with him? What right did he have to compete with him? Among the disciples outside the cliff, some of them came from Yuanyang, Taihao, and Yuxiao sections. They didn't know Zhang Yan, so they all curiously inquired about his background. At this time, the disciples from the aristocratic families in Qinsang school told them about Zhang Yan's past, causing them to exclaim in surprise. However, the disciples of the aristocratic families did not mind. From their point of view, the Furious Waves Cliff was the place where Zhang Yan's halberd would sink into the sand. No matter how brilliant and colorful the past was, it was only a foil for today. The more powerful this person was, the more it would reflect the brilliance of the aristocratic families. After today, all of this would be trampled under their feet, and become a fleeting cloud. The Great Pill Taoist glanced at Zhang Yan. Seeing that he was staring down without saying anything, he thought that he was in a difficult position. He took the initiative to step forward and said, "How many do you want to lock? Tell me." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "No need to lock." The Great Pill Taoist was startled at first, then looked deeply at him, nodded, and stepped to the side. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He stretched out his hand and pointed. A wisp of smoke flew out from his fingertip and went straight into the sea. It was just that this smoke was as thin as a spider's silk, falling in a single line, almost undetectable. The Great Pill Taoist's eyelids twitched slightly. He had been chosen as a Great Pill, so he naturally had a good eye. This smoke was extremely pure and without any flaws. From this, it could be seen that the quality of Zhang Yan's pill was not as simple as the rumors had said. However, the smoke was gathered in one place and did not spread out. Naturally, it could not be judged by common sense. Therefore, he only stared closely and did not make any rash judgments. After the smoke entered the sea, it climbed onto the body of a dragon whale. In an instant, it expanded and circled around its huge body a few times. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and moved his finger. The dragon whale was extremely violent and powerful. It stirred up winds and waves in the sea, but after being gently pulled by him, it actually swayed uncontrollably. In its panic, it struggled with all its might. This piece of azure sea water suddenly seemed to be boiling. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He once again exerted his strength. Without seeing any movement from him, this 150 feet long dragon whale, as if it was being hooked by a fish hook, shot out of the water with a boom and was suddenly lifted up. It desperately shook its body and whimpered, trying to break free from the shackles. However, no matter how much it struggled, it could not escape. This scene caused the surrounding disciples to click their tongues in wonder. However, many people did not think much of it. Evidently, they did not feel that this was difficult. Zheng Ying looked a few times and snorted coldly. He said mockingly, "Zhang Yan, Do you only know how to use these little tricks? The spiritual master's eyes showed some surprise, then a trace of understanding appeared on their faces. So it was a different trick. This Zhang Yan was smart. After all, the previous pills had forced the dragon whale to submit to the bottom of the sea. However, it was not enough to pull it up. It was clear and unforgettable. At least this move could win a lot of people on the scene. For Zhang Yan to be able to come up with this idea at this critical juncture, it could be considered as a quick-witted one. Also, pulling the dragon whale up seemed simple, but it required a high level of control over the pill fiend. If it was the slightest negligence, it would be embarrassing. If it was someone else, even if they had this idea, they might not have the guts to put it into practice. Zheng Hongtu looked down coldly. This Zhang Yan did have some skills and lived up to his reputation. However, this was as far as he could go. Measuring the strength of the pill, after all, was to observe the quality of the pill, not to show off his cleverness. However, the high-grade pill Daoist's expression was grave. At such a close distance, he could clearly see that from beginning to end, the dragon whale had not been able to resist at all. It allowed its opponent to do as he pleased, as if it was really a small fish that had been caught. However, Zhang Yan did not even bat an eyelid. From his casual appearance, it was clear that he still had some strength left. The tier-grade Daoist's eyes were complicated. If Zhang Yan had only gathered all the pill fiend in his body and used it in one place, it would not be a big deal. But if this person did it casually, it would be too shocking. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly smiled. He loosened his hand and threw the dragon whale back down. Zheng Ying was stunned, then he laughed out loud. He thought that Zhang Yan could not hold on any longer. His laughter caused the entire place to be filled with mockery. Zhang Yan did not care about this person at all. Just now, he was only trying to feel how heavy the dragon whale was. Though he did not doubt that he could easily suppress the 9 dragon whales, he was not sure how far he could go. However, after touching it, he had a feeling. Light. Too light. Then, next, Zhang Yan inhaled slightly. With this breath, Zheng Ying and the tier-grade Daoist suddenly felt a strong sense of uneasiness. They felt that the scattered sand and gravel on the cliff were jumping slightly, as if some shocking power was brewing. Zheng Hongtu, who was sitting on the cloud couch, suddenly had a change of expression. He leaned forward and stared down. Feng Haiqing and Du Ruoyu also seemed to have noticed something and frowned. The expressions of Spiritual Master Tian of Yuxiao School and Spiritual Master Su of Shaoqing sect also changed. Elder Gong's body trembled. His eyes were bright and his face was filled with excitement. He suddenly stood up. On the 1,000-feet cliff, a strand of white mist suddenly shot up into the sky from Zhang Yan's body. This boundless mist was peerlessly powerful, and it possessed the spirit to shake mountains and stir the seas. With a boom, smoke and dust billowed, sand and stones flew. The tier-grade Daoist and Zheng Ying could not stabilize their bodies and were pushed out by a wild current. They retreated several tens of feet. Just now, when they stabilized their bodies, their faces changed color. The smoke that seemed to cover the sky and cover the earth suddenly dispersed. Then, it turned into a huge hand that could hold up the sky. Its 5 fingers opened up and reached into the clouds, as if it wanted to grab the sun and the moon. Then, with a flip of its wrist, the palm came down and reached into the deep sea. With a muffled thunder, the sea water overflowed. The 9 dragon whales were all caught by him. This, outside of the furious waves cliff, the tens of thousands of disciples from the aristocratic families were all dumbfounded. They looked in disbelief at the dragon whales that were struggling like 9 loaches in the misty cloud hand. Feng Clan's patriarch Feng Haiqing's eyelids twitched. His fingers trembled as he said angrily, could it be that this Zhang Yan has reached the 2nd grade? Zheng Hongtu's face was ugly, his heart was filled with shame and anger. Just this grab had far surpassed what Zheng Ying had done. This Zhang Yan had actually hidden his strength so deeply that even he had been deceived. However, if they thought that this was the end, then they would be gravely mistaken. Zhang Yan seemed to feel that it was not enough. With a leap, he flew up and stood still in the air. Looking down, he suddenly let out a long roar. The sound was endless, causing the seawater to sway. The misty cloud hands suddenly shook, and actually lifted up once again. The chains that were binding the 9 whales made a loud noise, and were instantly stretched taut. What is he trying to do? With a hua-la sound, Zheng Hongtu stood up in shock. He did not even realize that the table in front of him had been overturned. Ka 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 ka, stone chips fell from the sky. Along with a series of hair-raising screeching noises, the chains that had sunk deep into the rocks were forcibly pulled out, section by section. Even the 9 dragon whales couldn't bear such a great force. They screamed and vomited blood under the tightness of the golden chains, and instantly, a fishy smell filled the air. Zhang Yan let out a loud roar, his voice reverberating in all directions. The misty cloud hands suddenly pulled upwards, and with a thunderous boom, the stone rampart collapsed. The golden hoop anchor head was actually uprooted. The tens of thousands of disciples outside the cliff felt their bodies and minds tremble under this scene. Their legs went soft, and they almost fell to the ground. Zhang Yan stood in the air with his hands behind his back. His big hands supported the sky, and the 9 dragon whales were in his hands. Wherever the wind blew, the Taoist robe on his body would tear apart. Zheng Ying's whole body was trembling, and his face was as pale as paper. It was unknown whether it was fear or confusion in his eyes. However, Zhang Yan did not pay attention to him. Instead, he turned around and looked at the many cultivators from the aristocratic families. These people all avoided his gaze. He raised his hand and pointed at the origin leaving essence jade on the platform of the cloud couch, and shouted loudly, "I want to take this item. Those who are not convinced can come up and compete with me." He looked around and said, "Who wants to come up?" The whole place was silent. Zhang Yan frowned and asked again, "Who wants to come up?" Blood flowed out from the corner of Zheng Ying's mouth. Zhang Yan raised his aura and shouted out once more. "Who dares to come up?" He shouted 3 times, but no one answered. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. With a thought, he threw the 9 dying dragon whales onto the mudflat. Then, he flew up to the cloud couch, and in front of the few spiritual masters, he waved his sleeves and took the origin leaving essence jade. He laughed loudly and leaped up, turning into a vast cloud and flew into the sky. Zheng Hongtu, Du Ruoyu, and Feng Haiqing all had ashen faces, and they were silent. At this time, they heard a faint voice from the cloud, saying, "After 100 refinements, the world is in your hands, the sun and moon rotate, the fire of the stars, deceiving the heavens and stealing the life of the Dharma snail. Thousands of waves and thousands of reefs are trampled, and there is no regret in living a long life." Suddenly, a loud laugh came out. Zheng Hongtu and the others couldn't help but turn their heads to look. It was Elder Gong who stood up and laughed wildly. He felt exhilarated, the clouds dispersed, and the stone in his chest disappeared. All the depression and suffocation from before were released in the laughter. He glanced at these people and laughed complacently again. With a wave of his wide sleeves, he flew away with his hands behind his back. The area in front of the furious waves cliff was deathly silent. The tens of thousands of disciples from the aristocratic families were all in a daze. Zheng Sun sat absent-mindedly in the middle of the flying building. His lips trembled as he muttered, "Pulling out the 9 whales, first-grade pill. Pulling out the 9 whales, first-grade pill. Target equals _blank. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.